Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still don't know what to make of it. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times, and it just doesn't fit. It's like a piece from a different puzzle that got dropped into my life, and now the picture's all wrong. This was last October, a Tuesday, I think. Yeah, it was a Tuesday because I remember we'd just helped my buddy move a bunch of furniture for his mom over the weekend, and we were both still sore. We were driving on Highway 35 through Wayne County, Missouri. It's a part of the state that feels old, not in a historical way, but in a deep, quiet way, like the trees have been holding their breath for a long, long time. The road is mostly just 2 lanes, winding through hills so thick with oak and pine that the asphalt feels like an afterthought. On either side, the trees press right up against the shoulder, and in the ditches, there are these waist-high weeds, tan and brittle-looking even before winter had really set in. They looked like a million little skeletons standing at attention. It was getting on towards evening. The sun was down, but it wasn't fully dark yet. That weird, gloomy time where the world loses its color and everything is just shades of gray and blue. We had the windows up because it was chilly. My friend was driving his old Ford Ranger, the one with the passenger side door that you had to shoulder bump to get open. The heater was whining, blowing out air that was just a little too warm and smelled like old dust. We were just talking, you know, normal stuff, arguing about whether the Cardinals had a shot next season, complaining about our bosses, the kind of dumb conversation that just fills the space. The radio was on low, some classic rock station fading in and out. I remember specifically, More Than a Feeling by Boston was playing, and I was half humming along, watching the trees zip by. We were coming up on this small bridge. It's not even a proper bridge over water, more of a large culvert where a creek passes under the road. I've driven over it 100 times. You can feel the little thump-thump as your tires go over the expansion joints. Just ahead on the left, the tree line is broken by a dirt track, probably used by loggers or hunters, just 2 ruts disappearing into the darkness under the trees. That's when I saw movement. It wasn't a deer. You see a lot of deer out there and you learn the way they move. This was different. This was low and fast. My brain didn't even register it as an animal at first. It was just a shape, a blot of deeper shadow detaching itself from the tree line right by that dirt track. "Whoa," I said, or something like it. Just a grunt of surprise. My friend must have seen it too because his chatter about baseball just stopped dead. The truck didn't slow down. We were probably doing 50, 55. We got closer, maybe 50 yards ahead now, and the thing came fully out onto the road. It came out of the trees on the left, and it was galloping. That's the only word for it, a gallop. But it was on all 4s. I keep trying to make it sound like a bear or a big dog, but it wasn't. It was all wrong. The first thing that hit me was its color. It was black. Not glossy black like a crow, but a flat, matte black like charcoal, like it absorbed the little bit of fading light left in the sky. And it was big, not elephant big, but bigger than a man. If it stood up, I have no doubt it would have been 7, 8 feet tall, but it wasn't standing. It was low to the ground, and it was moving with this terrifying fluid speed. Its front limbs, they weren't legs, they were long, too long, like a person's arms but bonier, and they reached out and planted its hands on the asphalt, and then its back legs would follow in this powerful, loping motion. It wasn't a run, it was a gallop, a frantic, powerful 4-legged gallop. Its hair was a mess, curly but not nice curls, thick matted ropey curls caked with mud and leaves. It looked filthy, and through that mess I could see its body, and it looked underfed. I could see the shape of its ribs, the sharp angles of its hips and shoulder blades pushing against the skin, and that matted fur. It was gaunt, hungry looking. But the worst part, the part that makes my stomach clench even now, was its head. It had no snout. It wasn't a bear's face. It was just a dark mass, and I couldn't see any ears. It was just this head, perched on a neck, with no distinguishing features, no pointed ears, no muzzle, just a dark, featureless shape. I was staring right at its profile for those 2 or 3 seconds, and my mind was screaming, trying to find something familiar to latch onto. A bear, a deformed cow, a giant wolf, and finding nothing. It was a blank, a biological void. The sound it made wasn't a growl or a roar. It was this heavy, wet, panting sound, like a dog that's been running for miles, but deeper, more guttural. We could hear it even through the closed windows, over the hum of the engine and the radio. A sound of pure, frantic exertion. It galloped across the road in maybe 3 or 4 of those powerful strides. It never looked at us. It was just focused on getting to the other side, from the left tree line to the right. Its path took it right in front of us. 50 yards is nothing in a car. We closed that distance in a heartbeat. My friend's reaction was pure, unthinking instinct. His foot, which had been resting on the gas, slammed down. The truck's engine roared. He wasn't trying to hit it. He was just trying to get away, to put as much distance as possible between us and that thing. The acceleration shoved me back into my seat. In that last second, as we shot past the spot where it had crossed, I turned my head to look out my passenger window, into the ditch and the weeds on the right-hand side of the road. It was already gone. It had just vanished. The weeds on that side were tall, yeah, but not tall enough to hide something that size. They were shaking, swaying a little, like something had just plowed through them, but there was no sign of the creature itself. It was as if the forest had just swallowed it whole. For a full minute, maybe 2, neither of us said a word. The only sounds were the straining engine and the wind rushing past the windows. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. My hands were gripping the dashboard so hard my knuckles were white. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out all over my body, a clammy chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. My friend finally spoke, his voice tight and too high. What the hell was that? I just shook my head. I couldn't form words. My mouth was dry as dust. I looked over at him. His face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the road ahead. He was driving way too fast now, his body rigid, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Was it a bear? He asked, but it wasn't a real question. It was a plea. He was begging me to give it a name, to put it in a box so we could file it away and forget about it. No, I managed to croak out. No, it wasn't a bear. We both knew it. Bears don't run like that. They don't have those long, spidery front limbs. They have snouts. They have ears. This thing had none of that. We drove for another 10 minutes in total silence, just the 2 of us breathing too fast, wrapped in our own private terror. He didn't slow down until we saw the lights of the next little town. We pulled into the first gas station we saw, a dimly lit place with 2 pumps and a flickering sign. He killed the engine, and we just sat there in the sudden heavy silence. The interior light of the truck came on, and we looked at each other. He looked as bad as I felt. We should tell someone, he said quietly. Tell them what? I asked. My voice was steadier now, but I could still feel a fine tremor in my hands, that we saw a big, black, hairy thing with no face run across the road. They'll think we're drunk or crazy. He knew I was right. We went inside, bought 2 bottles of water, and stood by the truck drinking them. We didn't talk about it. We talked about everything else. The price of gas, how cold it was getting. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't be real. The rest of the drive home was quiet. The easy camaraderie from earlier was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. We both stared out into the darkness beyond the headlights, half expecting to see it again, standing at the edge of the trees, waiting. He dropped me off at my place. I got out, and he just nodded at me. No, see you later. No, drive safe. Just a nod. I think we both knew we weren't going to be talking about this. Not to each other, not to anyone. I went inside, locked the door, and poured myself a drink. My hands were still shaking. I kept replaying it in my head. The way it moved, that awful, efficient gallop, the way its back muscles bunched and flexed under that matted fur, the complete absence of a face. I tried to rationalize it for weeks. A feral hog? No way. They're lower to the ground and they have distinct heads with tusks and snouts. A sick bear, with arms that long, with no ears, and that gallop. I've watched videos of bears running. It's a lumbering, clumsy run. This was fluid, powerful, alien. The sight of it is burned into my brain. It's the last thing I think about before I fall asleep some nights. I'll be drifting off, and then I'll see it again. That black shape flowing out of the trees and across the road in that strange loping gait. I'll hear that wet, panting breath. I've driven down Highway 35 a few times since then in the daylight. I even slowed down near that little bridge. The dirt track is still there. The weeds are still there. It all looks so normal, so mundane. But I know what I saw. I know that just beyond that tree line, in that deep, quiet darkness, something is out there. Something that shouldn't be. And I have no name for it. I have no explanation. I just have this memory, this cold, hard knot of fear in my gut, and the absolute certainty that we saw something that wasn't meant to be seen. Story 2. It was mid-August, a Friday. We'd planned this trip for weeks. 3 couples, all good friends, heading up to this small, secluded mountain lake in the Adirondacks. It wasn't a place you could drive to. You had to canoe in, which was part of the appeal. Total isolation. No cell service, no park rangers doing rounds, just us in the woods. The lake was... God, it was beautiful. Just perfectly still. Dark water surrounded by these tall, dense pines that went right up to the shoreline. The air smelled like pine needles and wet earth. We got there in the late afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water. We unloaded the canoes, set up camp in a small clearing right at the water's edge. There was a natural fire pit already there, ringed with stones, so we claimed the spot. The evening was perfect. I mean, textbook perfect camping trip. We got a big fire going, the kind that throws real heat and sends sparks twisting up into the dark sky. We cooked sausages and burgers on a grate we'd brought, drank a lot of beer, told stupid jokes, laughed way too loud. We were that group, you know, the one that's probably annoying everyone else in a 5-mile radius, but there was no one else. We were the only people there. That was the whole point. The noise didn't seem like a problem. It felt safe. We were making our presence known, marking our territory. The woods were big and dark around our little circle of firelight, but we were a bubble of light and sound and warmth. We felt untouchable. I remember looking at my watch at one point, and it was already 2:30 in the morning. The fire was dying down to a deep bed of glowing coals. Most of the group was fading. My spouse and the other 2 couples decided to call it a night and crawled into their tents, which were set up a little further back from the water, tucked under the trees. That left me and my buddy Mark sitting by the fire, just sipping the last of our beers, not talking much, just watching the embers pulse. The quiet after everyone else turned in was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. The lake was so still, it looked like black glass. The only sounds were the occasional crackle from the fire and the absolute profound silence of a wilderness at night. It's a silence that has weight to it. It presses in on your ears. We started talking in whispers without even realizing it, like we didn't want to disturb something. Mark finally stood up, stretched, and said he was hitting the sack. That left me alone. I poked at the fire for a few more minutes, but the feeling of being by myself out there started to get to me. It was a childish feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck. I decided to turn in too. Our tent was the one closest to the water. It was a good tent, a sturdy three-season thing, blue and grey. I remember unzipping the door, and the sound of the zipper was ridiculously loud in the quiet. I crawled in. My spouse was already asleep in their sleeping bag, breathing deep and steady. That made me feel better. I wriggled into my own bag, zipped it up, and just lay there on my back, looking at the dark shape of the tent ceiling. I was tired, but wired. My mind was still buzzing from the beer and the fire. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the slight rustle of my sleeping bag. That's when it started. My spouse muttered something in their sleep, a low, incoherent mumble. Then they went quiet again. A few seconds later, they suddenly spoke my name. Not loud, but sharp, urgent. I turned my head on the pillow. "You okay?" They didn't answer. I could feel them tense beside me. Then they said my name again, and this time their voice was tight with pure panic. "Something's out there." My heart, which had been beating slow and lazy, just slammed into my ribs. I held my breath, listening. At first, nothing, just the silence. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic splashing in the water right beside the tent, not a fish jumping. This was different. It was a deliberate sound, like something was wading close to the shore, just feet from where we were lying. Splash, swish, splash. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I just stared into the darkness of the tent, my ears straining. The splashing stopped. Then, from directly behind the tent, from the wall of pines maybe 10 feet away, came the sound of branches being moved, not snapped. It wasn't a crash. It was a slow, careful, heavy shifting, like something big was pushing its way through, trying to be quiet, but just too large to manage it. My spouse's hand found mine in the dark and squeezed hard. Their fingers were ice cold. We didn't speak. We didn't dare. We just lay there listening to this presence moving around our tent. It was behind us now. I could hear the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor, not the light scurry of a raccoon or a deer. This was a heavy, deliberate tread. Crunch, pause, crunch. Then it stopped. It was right there, right outside the back wall of the tent. I could feel it. The air in the tent felt thick, charged, like before a lightning strike. I could smell something too, cutting through the clean scent of pine. A smell I'd never encountered before, musky, thick, like wet dog and old meat and dirt. It was foul. It made my stomach clench. We were both holding our breath. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. I was lying on my side, facing the back wall of the tent, my eyes wide open, seeing nothing but dark nylon. Then I saw the fabric of the tent wall depress. It started near the top, a slow, inward bulge. My brain, scrambling for an explanation, thought, a branch. It's just a branch leaning on the tent. But it wasn't a branch. It moved, it slid downward, slowly, deliberately. It was in shape, a long, thick, rounded shape, and as it dragged down the tent wall, the material stretching and creaking softly with the pressure, I saw the distinct, unmistakable form of an elbow, a huge, articulated joint, covered in what looked like dark, wet hair or fur. I could see the curve of it, the way it bent. It was an elbow. Something was standing right outside our tent, and it had just dragged its elbow down the side of it. A sound came out of me then, a choked, strangled whimper that I didn't recognize as my own. My spouse made a similar sound, a sharp intake of breath that was pure terror. We were both paralyzed, locked in a nightmare. The pressure on the tent wall vanished. The fabric snapped back into place. For a single heart-stopping second, there was utter silence. The smell was still there, overwhelming. Then the world exploded. From right outside the tent came a series of heavy, quick, powerful thuds. It wasn't running on two legs. It was too fast, too impactful. It was like something massive was pounding the ground with immense force, launching itself away from us. The sound was solid, like someone slamming a sledgehammer into the earth. Thud, 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 thud. 5 of them. 5 solid, concussive impacts that I felt through the ground. They weren't footsteps, they were like detonations. Each one shook the floor of the tent. The first one was right there, and then they moved away at an impossible speed, heading up the slope behind our camp, into the deeper woods. The sound faded with shocking rapidity. In less than 3 seconds, it was gone. From 5 earth-shaking thuds to absolute, dead silence. We didn't move, we didn't speak. We just lay there, clutching each other's hands, listening to the silence that now felt even more terrifying than the sounds. The foul smell lingered for another minute or two. Then it too began to dissipate, replaced by the normal night air. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. My body was trembling uncontrollably, a full-body shake that I had no power to stop. My teeth were chattering. I was drenched in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. Finally, my spouse whispered, "Is it gone?" I couldn't answer. I just squeezed their hand. We spent the rest of the night like that, in our sleeping bags, too terrified to move, too terrified to even unzip the tent door and look outside. Every tiny sound, the rustle of a leaf, the call of a distant owl, made us jump. We didn't sleep a wink. We just waited for the sun. When the first grey light of dawn finally filtered through the tent fabric, it felt like a pardon. We moved then, stiff and cold and scared. We slowly, carefully unzipped the tent door and peered out. The camp was exactly as we'd left it. The dead fire, the empty beer bottles, the other tents still silent. The lake was calm and beautiful in the morning mist. It looked like a postcard. We scrambled out, our eyes scanning the ground behind our tent. The pine needles were thick and springy. It was hard to see any clear prints, but right where the elbow had been, the ground was disturbed. Not a clear footprint, but a patch where the needles were pressed down, and a few feet away another, and between them the ground was scuffed, like something powerful had pushed off. We woke the others up. Our voices were shaky as we told them what happened. They thought we were joking at first. Then they saw our faces. Mark came over and looked at the scuffed ground. He didn't say anything, just got a real serious look on his face. We packed up camp in record time. No one spoke much. We loaded the canoes in a frantic hurry, our eyes constantly darting back to the tree line. The peaceful, beautiful lake now felt like a trap. The woods were no longer inviting. They were a wall, hiding something. We paddled back to the car in silence. The whole drive home was quiet. We've talked about it since, me and my spouse, but not with the others. It's like we have an unspoken agreement not to bring it up. I keep going over it in my head. A bear? No. Bears don't move like that. They don't make 5 consecutive, perfectly spaced sledgehammer impacts as they run. They don't have elbows like that, and they don't investigate. A tent like that, it was curious, it was intelligent. The way it moved around us, the way it touched the tent, it was inspecting us. I've looked up sounds online. I've listened to recordings of supposed wood knocks and howls. I haven't found anything that sounds like those 5 rapid, fading thuds. Nothing. That was 9 months ago. I haven't gone camping since. I don't think I ever will. My spouse feels the same. We had a peaceful, fun trip, and in the space of maybe 2 minutes, it was torn apart by something we never saw, something that left no real evidence, something that just touched our tent and then vanished into the woods with a sound I will never, ever forget. I still don't know what it was, and that's the most terrifying part, not knowing, just knowing that it was out there, and that for a moment it was right there, separated from us by a thin sheet of nylon, and that it knew we were inside. Story 3. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way you asked. I'm still pretty messed up over it, and it's hard to even type this out, but I need to get it down. Maybe writing it will help, I don't know. My hands are still a little shaky. So, this happened just last week, on a Tuesday evening. My wife and I, we live out in the countryside in Georgia, not far from a small town. It's the kind of place where you know your neighbors, but the houses are spaced out with lots of woods and fields between them. We've got this routine, you know. Every evening after we finish up with work, we take our two dogs for a walk. We've been doing it for years. It's our time to unwind, talk about our day, just be together without screens or distractions. We have two dogs, a big, goofy Labrador mix named Bear and a smaller, scrappy terrier mix named Scout. They love these walks. They know the route by heart, and they get all excited when we grab their leashes. That Tuesday was just like any other. The weather was mild, not too hot, with that heavy, humid Georgia air starting to cool down as the sun went down. The sky was turning this deep orange and purple, and the fireflies were just starting to blink in the fields. It was peaceful, normal. We live on a quiet dirt road that loops through the woods and eventually connects to a bigger gravel road. Our usual walk takes us down our road, past a couple of neighbors' houses, then into a more wooded section before we hit the gravel road and loop back. The whole thing takes about 45 minutes. We always take a flashlight, even in the summer, because it gets dark fast under the tree canopy. That night, I had the flashlight, one of those big, heavy-duty ones with a strong beam. My wife was walking beside me, and the dogs were trotting ahead on their leashes, sniffing everything, tails wagging. We were talking about maybe painting the kitchen, just normal stuff. I remember laughing about something she said. We were about 10 minutes into the walk, just past the last house and entering the wooded part of the road. The trees here are thick, mostly pines and oaks, with a lot of underbrush. It gets dark there, even before the sun is fully down. I had the flashlight beam pointed ahead, sweeping it casually across the road and the tree line. The dogs were still happy, pulling a little on their leashes, and then they just stopped. Not a gradual thing. 1 second they're walking, the next they're frozen. Both of them. Bear, the big lab, let out this low growl from deep in his chest, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't a bark, it was a warning. Scout, the little one, was just rigid, her whole body tense, staring hard into the trees to our left. Her hackles were up, this ridge of fur standing straight along her back. I stopped walking. My wife bumped into me. "What is it?" she whispered. I didn't know. I thought maybe it was a deer or a coyote. We get those sometimes. I shined the flashlight where the dogs were looking, into the wall of trees and shadows. At first I didn't see anything, just leaves, branches, darkness. Then something moved. It was a shape, way back in the trees, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. It was big. It moved from behind one thick tree trunk to another, and it did it fast. Not running, but with a fluid, smooth motion that was wrong. It didn't move like a person, all janky and upright. It was more of a glide, like it was part of the shadows themselves. My heart did this little stutter, probably just a deer, I said to my wife, but my voice sounded thin, even to me. I kept the flashlight beam on the spot. The dogs weren't having it. Bear's growl got louder, a continuous rumbling threat. Scout let out a sharp, high-pitched whine. They were scared. I've seen them get excited about animals, but this was different. This was pure fear. We started walking again, maybe a little faster. I kept the flashlight trained on the tree line, sweeping it back and forth. For a minute, there was nothing. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. The woods can play tricks on you. Then I saw it again. It was keeping pace with us, staying just at the very edge of the flashlight beam. It was always in the deep shadows, so I never got a clear look, just impressions. It was tall, really tall, and it had these broad, heavy-looking shoulders. Its arms seemed too long, hanging down by its sides, and they swung as it moved. It wasn't crashing through the underbrush. It moved silently, stepping over fallen logs and through thickets without making a sound. I could hear our footsteps on the dirt, the dogs panting, my own breathing, but from it there was nothing, just this silent, shadowy presence matching our speed. My wife gripped my arm, her fingers digging in. "Do you see that?" she breathed. Her face was pale in the dim light. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I tried to get a better look, aiming the flashlight directly at it. But the second the beam started to center on it, it would slide back, deeper into the trees, always staying in that murky border between light and dark. It was like it knew exactly where the light ended. We picked up our pace, almost to a power walk. The dogs were pulling hard now, not out of excitement, but because they wanted to get away. They kept looking back, their growls now mixed with these scared little yips. They knew it was still there. We all did. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical weight on my skin. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a focused, predatory stare. I could feel it on the back of my neck, a cold spot right between my shoulder blades. I kept turning my head, trying to catch a proper glimpse, but it was always just a dark shape, a suggestion of a head, a massive torso, those long, swinging arms. It never made a sound, not a snap of a twig, not a rustle of leaves. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the frogs, had gone completely silent. The woods were dead quiet, except for us. It was the silence that really started to get to me. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the air before a storm. We were about halfway through the wooded section, and the thing was still with us, pacing us effortlessly. It wasn't getting closer, but it wasn't falling behind either. It was just there. A constant, silent companion in the shadows. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it could be. A bear? No, bears don't walk on two legs like that, and they aren't that tall or that quiet. A person in a weird coat? No way. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the shoulders were too wide. The way it moved was just alien. My wife was crying quietly, just little hitching breaths. She had her phone out, but we had no service out there. We were completely on our own. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my knuckles white. It felt pathetic, this little circle of light against all that darkness and whatever was in it. Then the road began to curve, leading towards the main gravel road. The trees started to thin out a little. I thought, maybe when we get into the more open area, it'll leave. Maybe it's a creature of the deep woods. But it didn't leave. As the trees thinned, it adjusted. It fell back a bit, but it started moving in a wider arc, like it was flanking us, keeping to the thicker patches of shadow that were left. It was smarter than any animal had a right to be. It understood the terrain, it understood the light, and it understood that we were terrified. The dread was a cold ball in my stomach. This wasn't just a random animal crossing our path. This thing was interested in us. It was following us with a purpose. I've never felt so much like prey in my life. I felt small and weak and completely exposed. We were almost running now, a clumsy, fast walk that was just short of a jog. The gravel road was just up ahead, maybe 100 yards away. I could see a sliver of it through the last line of trees. It meant people, cars, safety. It felt 1,000,000 miles away. I risked one last look over my shoulder, shining the flashlight back the way we came. And for a split second, I saw it clearly. It had stopped. It was standing perfectly still, maybe 50 feet back, partly hidden by a large pine tree. The flashlight beam caught the side of it. It was covered in dark hair, like a wet, shaggy fur. It was enormous. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its head was blocky, and I couldn't see any eyes, just deep shadows where they should be, but I felt its gaze, a palpable, intelligent force. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its hands... I don't even want to think about its hands. They looked huge. Then it was gone. It didn't run. It just melted back into the trees, so fast my eyes could barely track it. 1 second it was there, a solid, massive thing. The next there was nothing but empty woods. We didn't stop. We burst out onto the gravel road, the dogs scrambling, my wife sobbing with relief. We stood there under the open sky, panting, hearts hammering against our ribs. The normal night sounds were back, a distant dog barking, the hum of a car a mile away. We looked back into the woods. Nothing, just darkness. We practically ran the rest of the way home, not saying a word. We didn't let go of each other's hands the whole time. When we got inside, we locked the door and just sat on the couch shaking for a long time. The dogs were spooked for the rest of the night, lying by our feet and jumping at every little sound. We haven't gone on an evening walk since. I keep going over it in my head. The way it moved, the silence, the sheer size of it. I've lived around these woods my whole life. I know the animals. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't a man. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, living right there on the edge of our normal everyday world. The worst part is the feeling it left me with. It's not just the fear of that night. It's the knowledge that the world isn't as simple as I thought it was. There are things in the shadows that we don't understand, things that watch us from the edges of the light. And one of them knows exactly where I live. I look out my window at the dark tree line now, and I don't see peace anymore. I just see the place where it stood, watching us, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting. Story 4. The first couple of weekends that month, I'd started noticing things weren't right. The woods at night, they're never silent, but the usual sounds, the crickets, the frogs down by the creek, the occasional owl, they'd just stop, not fade out, but cut off like someone threw a switch. And then you'd hear these other sounds, not animal sounds, not any animal I'd ever heard in 50 years of hunting and trapping and just being in the Missouri woods. There were these deep guttural knocks, like someone was taking a big sledgehammer to the base of a hollow tree. Thump, thump, thump. It didn't echo right. The sound was too dense, too heavy, and there were whoops, not like an owl, not like a coyote. This was a whooping sound, but lower, with a weird rolling quality to it, like it was coming from a chest bigger than any man's. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was kids messing around, though my place is a good 2-mile hike from the nearest gravel road, and it was happening late, past 10 o'clock. Maybe it was a new kind of owl, or a fox with a weird bark. But it didn't sit right. It felt intelligent. The knocks would sometimes come in sequences, like a call and response from different parts of the woods. That's what really got under my skin. This particular Friday night, I was in my usual spot. I've got an old single-wide trailer on the property. Nothing fancy, but it's got a roof and a door that locks. I was sitting at the small formica table by the window, cleaning my shotgun for the upcoming season. It was a little after 10, and the night chorus was going strong. I had the window open a crack, just enough to feel the cool April air and hear what was going on outside. Then it happened. The switch flipped. Everything went dead silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. It's a silence that's heavier than any noise. It presses in on your eardrums. I stopped what I was doing, my hands freezing mid-motion with the cleaning rod. I just listened. My heart started thumping a little harder against my ribs. Then it came from the southwest, from the direction of the deepest part of my woodlot. A whoop. It wasn't loud, but it carried through that dead air like it was right outside the window. It was a deep whoop sound, and it was followed immediately by this sound I can't even properly describe. The best I can do is a loud, rumbling screech. It wasn't high-pitched like a rabbit or a bird. It was low, guttural, full of rage, and it vibrated. I could feel it in the floor of the trailer. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your ears and just goes straight to the primal part of your brain, the part that knows when something wants to eat you. Before the echo of that screech had even died away, an answer came from the southeast, from across the creek on the Thompsons' land. Another whoop, slightly different in tone. And then a single, powerful thump of a wood knock from that same direction. My blood went cold. I'm not a man who scares easy. I've walked out of these woods in the dark more times than I can count. But this was different. This wasn't a lone coyote or a disoriented buck. This was a conversation, a coordinated conversation, happening in the dark woods around my home. It happened 3 more times. A whoop and that horrible screech from the southwest, followed by an answering whoop and a wood knock from the southeast. 4 times total. Each time, the silence in between was absolute and terrifying. I didn't move a muscle. I just sat there, my knuckles white around the cleaning rod, listening to these things talk to each other around my property. After the 4th exchange, the normal night sounds slowly, tentatively, started back up. The frogs first, then the crickets. It was like the woods themselves had been holding their breath. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little crack of a twig outside had me bolting upright in bed. I kept my shotgun leaning against the wall, right next to me. Saturday was a long day. The sun was out, the woods looked normal, peaceful even. I tried to do some scouting for turkeys, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the thickets, feeling like I was being watched. The feeling was so strong, it was almost a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. I found a few turkey tracks down by the creek, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about those sounds. I walked the tree line where the screeches had come from. The ground was a mess of leaves and fallen branches. I didn't see any tracks that looked out of the ordinary, no broken saplings, nothing. The normalcy of it in the daylight was almost worse. It made the memory of the night before feel like a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. As evening fell, the dread started to set in again. It was a physical feeling, a tightness in my gut. I made sure all the windows were locked, even though it made the trailer stuffy. I checked the .45 caliber pistol I keep in the nightstand drawer. I made sure it was loaded, a round in the chamber, the safety on. I put it on the small table next to the bed, within easy reach. I didn't even bother trying to read or watch the small TV. I just sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, fully clothed except for my boots, and listened. The night started normally. The sounds were there, the familiar soundtrack of the forest. I started to feel a little foolish. Maybe it had been a pair of barred owls having a territorial dispute. They can make some strange noises. Maybe the wood knocks were just trees settling. I was letting my imagination run away with me. Then around 11 o'clock, it happened again. The silence. That absolute, suffocating silence. It felt even heavier than the night before. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly, carefully stood up from the bed. The floorboard creaked under my weight, and the sound was obscenely loud in the quiet. I picked up the pistol from the table. The metal was cool and familiar in my hand. I flipped the safety off. The click was like a gunshot. I stood there in the middle of the dark room, not moving, just listening so hard my ears started to ache. I couldn't hear anything, not the wind, not a single insect. It was a vacuum. My bedroom window faces west, looking out towards the creek. There was a nearly full moon that night, and it was casting a good amount of silvery light into the room, painting a bright rectangle on the floorboards. I was staring at that rectangle, my eyes fixed on it when it began to change. It didn't fade, it was blotted out. Something massive moved between the moon and my window, and the room went pitch black. I mean instantly, completely dark. My heart just stopped. I swear it stopped beating for a full second. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. There was something right outside my window, something so big it blocked out the entire moon. My mind was screaming, trying to process it. A bear. We have black bears in Missouri, but they don't stand on their hind legs and block a window that's 5 feet off the ground. A person? No one is that tall, that wide. And then the smell hit me. It came in through the tiny gaps around the window frame, a faint, musty, wet dog smell. But it was mixed with something else, something foul and earthy like rotten meat and old damp leaves. It was a thick, heavy smell that coated the back of my throat, I was frozen solid, my fingers clenched around the pistol grip. I was holding my breath without even realizing it. My lungs started to burn. I was staring into the absolute blackness where my window was, trying to see something, anything. All I could see was a deeper black against the dark of the room. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears, a frantic whooshing sound. I could feel it out there. I can't explain how, but I could feel its presence. It was a feeling of immense weight, of age, of a raw, wild intelligence that was focused entirely on me, on the flimsy metal box I was standing in. It knew I was in here. It was looking in at me. My arm felt like it was made of lead. I started to raise the pistol, my movements slow and jerky. I was pointing it in the general direction of the window, but my hand was shaking so badly I knew if I fired, I'd probably just put a hole in my own wall. What was I going to shoot at? A shadow? A smell? We stood like that for what felt like an hour, me and whatever was on the other side of that glass. Me, a 60-year-old man with a pistol, trembling in the dark. This presence, this immense, silent thing that had shut down the entire forest just by being there. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The moonlight flooded back into the room, so sudden it made me flinch. The rectangle was back on the floor, bright and sharp. The wet dog smell lingered for a few more seconds. Then it too was gone, carried away on a slight breeze I hadn't felt before. And then, the most unnerving thing of all happened. The night sounds started up again, first a single hesitant cricket chirp, then another, then the frogs down by the creek joined in. It was as if someone had given the all-clear signal. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there in the middle of the room, the pistol held out in front of me, listening to the normal, everyday sounds of the Missouri woods. I finally lowered my arm, my shoulder aching from the tension. I flipped the safety back on with a thumb that felt numb. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my bones. When I could finally make my legs work, I went to the window. I didn't open it. I just pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the interior reflection, and looked out. Nothing. The moonlit clearing behind my trailer was empty. The trees stood silent and still. I must have stood there for 10 minutes just scanning back and forth, looking for any movement, any shape that shouldn't be there. There was nothing. As soon as the sun started to come up, casting a grey light through the trees, I went outside. The grass was wet with dew. I walked carefully around to the side of the trailer, right under my bedroom window. The ground there is mostly hard-packed dirt and a few straggly weeds. Not great for holding a print. I got down on my hands and knees, ignoring the dampness soaking into my jeans. I searched every inch of that ground. I found my own boot prints from the day before. I found a few deer tracks from a week ago, weathered and faint. I found a place where a raccoon had dug for grubs, but I found no sign of what had been there. No massive footprints, no broken bushes, no hair caught on the rough siding of the trailer. Nothing. It was as if the whole thing had been a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see when the light vanished. I know what I smelled. That wet, rotten smell is burned into my memory. I packed my things and left that morning. I didn't even stay for the Sunday scouting I'd planned. I drove home, and the whole 2-hour drive, my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. I went back for turkey season the next weekend, during the day. I didn't camp. I haven't spent a night out there since. I still own the land, I still hunt it. But I'm always looking over my shoulder, my senses on a hair trigger. The woods don't feel the same anymore. They feel occupied. They feel like I'm the visitor, and something else is the permanent resident. I've never heard the whoops or the knocks or that god-awful screech again. But sometimes, when I'm walking a ridge or sitting in my deer stand, the woods will go quiet for just a moment too long, and that old, cold fear will clamp down on my chest all over again. I never saw it. I have no proof. Just the memory of a blacked-out window, a terrible smell, and the absolute soul-chilling certainty that I was not alone. Deduction Story 5. I was 15 years old, living on the reservation in Wyoming, and it was one of those winters that just wouldn't let up. The snow had been falling for hours, thick and heavy, piling up in drifts that swallowed the edges of the road and made the whole world feel muffled and small. I remember it was a Tuesday, because my mom had asked me to help with chores after school, and Tuesdays were always the days we checked on the livestock near the highway. The wind was howling, not in a scary way at first, just in that constant whining noise that gets under your skin after a while. I was bundled up in an old coat that was too big for me, hand-me-downs from my cousin, and my gloves were soaked through from earlier when I'd been messing around with some friends. My boots crunched into the snow, each step sinking deep, and the cold bit at my cheeks until they felt raw. The gate I needed to open was about a quarter mile from our house, right where the reservation land met the highway. It was this old, rusted thing that stuck sometimes, especially in wet weather, and my dad had been meaning to fix it for months, but with the storm, it was just one of those things that had to get done. I didn't mind it too much. Being out in the snow had a kind of peace to it, even with the wind whipping around. The sky was this dull grey like dirty wool, and the snowflakes were big and wet, sticking to my eyelashes and making it hard to see too far ahead. I could hear the occasional truck rumbling by on the highway, but the sound was distant, swallowed up by the storm. As I got closer to the gate, my hands were already starting to ache from the cold. I remember fumbling with the latch, my fingers stiff and clumsy. It was one of those simple metal latches you lift and slide, but the ice had crusted over it, and I had to chip at it with the heel of my hand. My breath puffed out in white clouds, and I kept my head down, focusing on the task. The snow was coming down harder now, swirling in gusts that made the trees along the fence line sway and creak. I remember thinking how isolated it felt out there. Just me, the gate, and this vast white emptiness stretching out in every direction. The reservation has a lot of open land, and in a storm like that, it's easy to feel like you're the only person left in the world. I finally got the latch loose, and I started to push the gate open. It screeched on its hinges, a sound that always set my teeth on edge. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, movement, fast and low to the ground at first, then rising up. My head snapped up, and for a second, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a deer caught in the storm. But it wasn't. It was tall, way taller than any person I'd ever seen, and covered in dark, shaggy hair that was matted with snow. It was moving across the road, maybe 50 feet away from me, and it was so quick that my brain barely registered what I was seeing. One moment it was there, the next it was almost gone, but not before it turned its head and looked right at me. Time didn't just slow down, it felt like it stopped dead. My heart hammered in my chest so loud I could hear it over the wind. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up, prickling like someone had dragged a cold finger down my spine. My hands, which had been cold before, went icy and damp, and I could feel the sweat beading on my palms, even though the air was freezing. My stomach did this weird flip, like I'd just dropped from a height, and for a second I thought I might throw up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there with the gate half open, staring. The figure was huge. I'd guess over 7 feet tall, but it was hard to tell with the snow and the way it was hunched over as it moved. Its arms were long, swinging in a way that didn't look human, and the hair was dark brown or black, clumped and wet. It didn't run so much as lope, covering ground in these big, effortless strides. When it looked at me, its eyes, I don't even know if they were eyes, but there was something there, dark and deep, seemed to lock onto mine. It wasn't a long look, maybe a second or two, but it felt like an eternity. There was no sound from it, no growl or anything, just the crunch of snow under its feet, which was eerily quiet for something that size. Then it was gone, vanishing into the trees on the other side of the road. Just like that. 1 second it was there, the next it was swallowed up by the storm. I stood there for what felt like minutes, but it was probably only a few seconds. My body was frozen, not just from the cold, but from this sheer, gut-wrenching terror. I'd never felt anything like it before. It wasn't the kind of fear you get from a scary movie or a jump scare. It was deeper, primal, like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to get away. Finally, I managed to move. I let go of the gate, and it swung shut with a loud clang that made me jump. I turned and started running back toward the house, my legs feeling like jelly. The snow was deep, and I kept stumbling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. All I could think about was getting inside where it was safe. The wind felt like it was pushing against me, and the snow stung my face, but I didn't care. I just ran, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. When I got to the house, I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. My mom was in the kitchen, and she took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I was shaking all over, my teeth chattering, and I couldn't get the words out at first. She asked me what happened, and I just blurted out that I'd seen something big and hairy out by the gate. She tried to calm me down, saying it was probably a bear or a moose, but I knew it wasn't. I'd seen bears before, and moose, and this was different. It moved differently. It looked different. There was an intelligence in that look it gave me, something that felt ancient and wild. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I kept feeling that cold dread in my stomach. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it, the way it moved, the way it turned its head. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks in the storm. But I knew better. The physical reactions were too real. My neck still felt prickly, and my hands were clammy for hours. I couldn't eat dinner that night. My stomach was in knots. As it got dark, the storm kept raging outside, and I kept peering out the window, half expecting to see it again. But there was nothing. Just the white blur of snow and the occasional glow from the highway lights. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over, trying to make sense of it. But I couldn't. It was too fast, too surreal. The next day, the storm had passed, and the world was quiet and blanketed in white. I went back out to the gate with my dad, partly to make sure it was closed properly, and partly because I needed to see if there were any signs. The snow had covered everything, so there were no tracks, no nothing. It was like it had never happened, but I knew it had. That fear stayed with me for weeks, months, even years. I'd get jumpy whenever I had to go out alone, especially in bad weather. I started paying more attention to the stories older folks on the reservation would tell about things in the woods, things that didn't have names. I never saw it again, and I never told many people about it because who would believe me? But I know what I saw, and that moment, that split-second look, is burned into my memory forever. Even now, years later, I can still feel that icy grip on my hands, that flip in my stomach, and the way time seemed to stand still. I don't have any explanations, no neat ending to wrap it up. It just happened, and it left me with this lingering unease that never really went away. Sometimes, when I'm out in the woods or driving on a lonely road, I'll get a shiver down my spine, and I'll remember that day in the snowstorm, and I'll wonder what it was and why it looked at me like that. But I'll never know. It's just one of those things that stays with you, a piece of the unknown that you carry around forever. Story 6. I was 15 years old, and it was one of those late summer days that feels like it's stretching out forever. The kind where the air is still warm, even as the sun starts to dip below the trees. We'd spent the day across the border in this little Canadian town, just messing around like teenagers do, grabbing snacks, maybe flirting with a few girls we'd never see again. Nothing special. My best friend and I were in the back seat of his older brother's beat-up sedan. the kind of car that smelled like old fast food and wet dog. But it got us where we needed to go. His brother was driving, and he was usually the calm one, the guy who never got rattled, which is why what happened next stuck with me so hard. We were driving back home along the Kettle River in Washington, on this narrow two-lane road that winds right alongside the water. It was getting dark, not full night yet, but that deep blue hour where shadows start to pool under the trees and you have to squint to see anything clearly. The radio was playing some classic rock station, low enough that we could all talk over it, and we were just chatting about stupid stuff, school starting soon, video games, whatever. I remember feeling tired but content, the kind of lazy happiness that comes from a day with no responsibilities. The windows were cracked open, letting in that cool, damp river smell mixed with pine. And I was just watching the trees blur past, not really thinking about anything. Then out of nowhere, his brother slammed on the brakes. I mean, he jammed them so hard that the car skidded a little, tires screeching on the asphalt, and we all lurched forward. I banged my knee against the back of the front seat, and my friend next to me let out a yelp. For a second, everything was chaos. The music cut off as the engine stalled, and the only sound was our heavy breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the car cooling down. My heart was already pounding, not from fear yet, just from the shock of it. I thought maybe he'd seen a deer or something, because animals dart out on these roads all the time, especially around dusk. But then I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. Right in the middle of the road, maybe 50 feet ahead of us, was this thing. It was huge, like taller than any person I'd ever seen, easily 8 feet tall, if not more, and it was covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the fading light. It was walking upright, on 2 legs, but not like a person, more like how you'd imagine a gorilla moving, but smoother, more confident. Its arms were long and swung slightly as it walked, and for a heartbeat it didn't seem to notice us. Then it pivoted at the waist, just turned its upper body toward us without moving its feet, and I got a clear look at its face. That's the part that still gives me nightmares. The face was human-like, but not human at all. It had these deep-set eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light. No whites, just dark pools, and a broad, flat nose. Its mouth was kind of slack, like an ape's. But there was intelligence there, something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just an animal, it was looking right at us. And I felt this primal fear kick in, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands go cold. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. I just stared, and it felt like time had slowed down to a crawl. The creature didn't run or charge or anything. It just turned back and started crossing the road diagonally, moving at a steady jog, like it had somewhere to be, and we were just an inconvenience. Its movements were powerful, each step making its muscles ripple under that thick coat of hair. It was fast, too, covering the width of the road in what felt like seconds, and then it disappeared into the trees on the other side. But it didn't just vanish. It crashed through the underbrush, and the sound was deafening. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, like something massive was plowing through without a care. That's when his brother, still gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, reached over and turned off the engine. Then he killed the headlights. The car went dark and silent, except for the 3 of us breathing heavily. I remember the smell hit us then, and it was awful, like a mix of rotten eggs, feces, and that sour stench of someone who hasn't bathed in weeks. It was so strong, it made my eyes water, and I had to fight not to gag. My friend beside me whispered, "What the hell was that?" But none of us answered. We were too scared to speak louder than a murmur. We sat there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or 2. Outside, the crashing sounds continued, moving away from us, but still loud, like whatever it was, wasn't trying to be quiet. Then we heard heavy breathing, deep grunts that sounded almost like a bear, but higher pitched, more rhythmic. It was like it was communicating or something, but I don't know. Maybe it was just moving through the forest. The sounds echoed in the quiet, and I could feel every hair on my arms standing up. I was shaking, my hands trembling in my lap, and I kept thinking, this can't be real, this can't be happening. But it was, and the fear was so intense it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I remember looking at my best friend's face in the dim light. He was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and he kept swallowing like he was trying not to throw up. His brother was just staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, and I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. None of us said much, just occasional whispers like, "Do you hear that?" or "Is it gone?" But we all knew it wasn't. The smell lingered, filling the car, and every time we heard another crash or grunt, we'd flinch. I felt so exposed, sitting in that dark car on an empty road with who knows what out there in the woods. I kept imagining it circling back, coming for us, and my heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst. After a few more minutes, the sound started to fade, moving deeper into the forest, but the smell hung around, thick and oppressive. His brother finally whispered, "We need to go, now." He turned the key in the ignition, and the engine coughed to life, sounding louder than ever in the silence. He didn't turn the headlights back on right away. He just put the car in gear and started driving, slow at first, then faster as we got further away. I kept looking back out the rear window, half expecting to see those eyes glowing in the dark, but there was nothing except blackness. We drove in silence for a long time, nobody saying a word. The radio was still off, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. I could feel the adrenaline starting to wear off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it a bear? But bears don't walk upright like that, and they don't have faces that look almost human. Plus the smell, I've been near bears before, and it's nothing like that. This was something else, something I'd only heard about in stories but never believed. When we finally got back to town, it was fully dark, and we pulled into his brother's driveway, just sitting there for a minute before anyone moved. His brother finally said, "We can't tell anyone about this. They'll think we're crazy." And he was right. Over the next few days, we tried to talk about it with a couple of people, our parents, a friend or two, but nobody believed us. They said we must have seen a bear or a hoax, or maybe we were just tired and imagining things, but we knew what we saw, and that knowledge settled deep inside me, like a cold stone in my gut. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Every time I'm in the woods or driving on a dark road, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched. My best friend and I don't talk about it much, but every once in a while, when we're together, we'll raise a glass and toast to Bigfoot, not as a joke, but as a way of acknowledging that we shared something terrifying and real. It's our little secret, a bond forged in fear. I don't know what that creature was, and I probably never will, but I know it changed me. It made the world feel bigger and stranger, and a lot more frightening. That's it, really. That's what happened that day. I've never been able to explain it, and I've stopped trying. Some things just are, and you have to live with them. Story 7. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I can't shake what happened, and maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just freak me out all over again. Either way, here goes. This was back in late summer, I think around August, on a river trip along the middle fork of the Salmon River in Idaho. I'd been on a few of these trips before with a group of friends, and some folks I didn't know too well. Just a bunch of people who love the outdoors, you know. We'd been camping for a couple of days already, and that morning we'd set up a new spot after paddling downriver. The air was crisp, not too hot, with that clean pine smell you only get out in the middle of nowhere. I remember helping clean up camp after breakfast, wiping down plates and stuffing trash into bags. The kind of mindless work that lets your thoughts wander. Everyone was lounging around, chatting or sipping coffee, and I felt this itch to get away for a bit. I'd heard about Sheep-Eater Hot Springs from one of the guides. It was supposed to be a short hike away, maybe a mile or so, and I figured it'd be nice to soak in some warm water and have a little solitude. So I told the group I was heading out, and nobody seemed bothered. A couple of people nodded. One guy said, "Don't get lost." And that was it. I grabbed my water bottle, threw on a light jacket, because the weather can turn fast out there, and started walking. The trail wasn't too steep at first, just a narrow dirt path winding through tall pines and patches of sagebrush. The ground was soft under my boots, and I could hear the river fading behind me, replaced by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional bird call. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel small, but in a good way. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be out here, away from all the noise of the city. But as I got deeper into the hike, things started to feel different. The trail climbed a bit, and the trees thickened, blocking out more of the sky. The light got dimmer, like it was later in the day, even though it was only mid-morning. I didn't think much of it at first, just the way the forest is sometimes. But then I noticed the sounds changing. The birds stopped chirping and the air went still, like someone had hit a mute button. I've been in quiet woods before, but this was different. It was heavy, oppressive, like the silence was weighing down on me. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up, and I had this weird sensation that I was being watched. You know that feeling, when your skin prickles and you just know someone's eyes are on you. Yeah, that. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was just being jumpy. I kept walking, focusing on the path ahead. The hot springs were supposed to be near a rocky outcrop, and I could see the slope rising to my left, covered in loose stones and scraggly trees. That's when I heard it, a sharp crack, like a thick branch snapping. It came from up on the slope, and it was loud enough to make me freeze in my tracks. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, and I scanned the area, but I didn't see anything moving. No animals, no people, just rocks and trees. Then, before I could even process it, a rock came flying down from above. It wasn't a small pebble. This thing was about the size of my fist, and it landed maybe 10 feet in front of me with a thud that sent dust flying. I flinched, my body tensing up, and I looked up toward where it came from. Nothing, just the slope, silent and still. I thought maybe it was a natural rock fall or something, but then another rock came. This one was bigger, and it hit the bank of the trail right next to me, so close I felt the vibration through the ground. That one had force behind it, like it was thrown, not just rolling down. My breath caught in my throat, and I ducked instinctively, my hands going up to protect my head. I could feel the adrenaline kicking in, my muscles tightening, ready to run, but I didn't see anyone. No one shouting, no movement, just the slope looming over me, dark and shadowy. The air felt even heavier now, thick and hard to breathe, like I was sucking in soup. I remember the smell, earthy, damp, with a hint of something metallic like old blood or rust. It made my stomach turn. I started backing away slowly, my eyes glued to the slope. Every few seconds, I'd hear another crack or the scuff of rocks shifting, but no more rocks came flying. It was like whatever was up there was toying with me, letting me know it was there without showing itself. I felt this deep primal fear creeping in, the kind that doesn't come from thinking, but from somewhere in your gut. It was telling me to get out, now. I turned and started hurrying down the trail, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't run full out because I was afraid of tripping on the uneven ground, but I moved fast, my boots scuffing against the dirt. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing back, expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing, just that empty, watchful silence. By the time I reached the hot springs, I was sweating and shaking. The springs were in a small clearing, steam rising off the water, and a few people from my group were already there, lounging in the pools. They looked relaxed, laughing and talking, and the contrast was jarring. I must have looked like a wreck, because one of them asked if I was okay. I tried to play it cool, but my voice came out shaky. I asked them, "Did any of you come up here earlier? Like throw rocks or something from the slope?" They all looked at me like I was crazy. One guy chuckled and said, "Nah, man, we've been here the whole time. Why, did you see something?" I explained what happened. The cracks, the rocks, the feeling of being watched. They listened, but I could tell they didn't really get it. One woman said it was probably just a bear or a falling branch, and another joked that I'd had too much sun. But I knew it wasn't that. The rocks were thrown with purpose, one after another, and that heavy, still air wasn't normal. It felt intelligent, like whatever it was knew exactly what it was doing. We stayed at the hot springs for a bit longer, but I couldn't relax. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I'd tense up. That feeling of being watched never went away. It clung to me like a cold sweat. When we hiked back to camp, I stuck close to the group, but even then, I kept looking over my shoulder. The hike back felt longer, and the forest seemed darker, more menacing. I noticed things I hadn't before, like how the trees were bent in weird angles in some spots, or how there were broken branches high up, way above where any animal could reach. Back at camp, everyone went about their evening, setting up tents, starting a fire, cooking dinner. I tried to join in, but my mind was stuck on what happened. I kept replaying it in my head. The sound of that crack, the way the rocks landed, the oppressive silence. I felt this dread building in my chest, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. Around the fire that night, people told stories, but I didn't contribute much. I just sat there, staring into the flames, feeling that unseen presence lurking out in the dark. As the night wore on, the fear didn't fade. If anything, it got stronger. I lay in my tent later, listening to the sounds of the forest, the river, the wind, the occasional owl. But underneath it all, I thought I heard something else. A low, guttural sound, too deep to be an animal I knew, and the faint crunch of footsteps moving slowly around the perimeter of our camp. I didn't sleep much. Every noise had me bolting upright, my heart racing. I felt like a kid again, afraid of the dark, but this was worse because it was real. The next morning, we packed up and moved on down the river, and I never saw or heard anything like that again, but that day stuck with me. Even now, years later, I get chills thinking about it. I've read stories online about similar things in remote areas, people hearing rocks thrown, feeling watched, that heavy air. And it always brings me back to that hike. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a person messing with me, but out there, in that isolated part of Idaho, it didn't feel human. It felt like something else, something old and smart, and it knew I was there. I still can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 8. Okay, here it is. I'm just going to type it out. I've been sitting on this for decades and finding this place online, reading other people's stories. I guess it's my turn. My name's George. This was back in 1978. I was in the Air Force then, stationed at March Air Force Base in Riverside, California. It was a whole new world for a kid from the Midwest. To get away from the noise and the constant hum of the base, I'd go camping, alone, always alone. I liked the solitude, the quiet. My spots were Yosemite and Sequoia National Park. I knew them pretty well, or at least I thought I did. The first time something weird happened was up near Tioga Pass in Yosemite. I'd parked my truck off this fire road near Yosemite Creek and decided to just sleep under the stars. No tent, just a mummy bag on a ground sheet. It was a clear night, cold, but not freezing. I remember falling asleep looking at the Milky Way, feeling pretty damn small in a good way. I woke up later, not sure what time it was, but the moon was high. I was awake because I heard something, not an animal sound, not a rustle. This was a sound I didn't have a name for. It was a heavy, careful crunching. Something big was walking, not running, not trotting, walking. and it was close. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. My heart just started hammering in my chest, so loud I was sure whatever it was could hear it. My brain just shut down, all my training, everything, it just vanished. All I could do was pull the drawstring on my mummy bag tight until just a little hole was left for my mouth, and I scrunched down inside. I pulled my arms in and made myself as small as possible. I was lying on my side, facing away from the direction of the sound, and I just closed my eyes and prayed. I'm not a religious man, but I prayed then. The footsteps got closer. They were slow, deliberate. I could feel the vibration through the ground. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't a bear. Bears are clumsy. This thing walked with a weight that felt intelligent, like it knew exactly where it was putting its feet. Then it stopped. Right next to me, I could feel its presence, this immense shadow blocking out the cold air. I held my breath. I didn't move a muscle. I was rigid with terror. Then I felt it, a pressure on my bag, right on my hip and back. It wasn't a poke. It wasn't a claw. It felt like the back of a hand, a huge, heavy hand. It just pushed down, not hard enough to hurt me, but firm. Then it lifted. A second or two passed, and it pushed down again. Same spot, then again, and again, 5 times. I counted each one, my mind screaming, each push driving the air out of my lungs in a silent whimper. It was testing me. That's the only thing I can think. It was seeing if I would move, if I was alive. I just stayed frozen, playing dead, my face pressed into the nylon of the sleeping bag, smelling my own fear and the faint scent of the campfire from hours before. After the 5th push, it just stopped. The pressure was gone. I waited, listening, but I couldn't hear anything. No breathing, no footsteps walking away. It was just gone. The forest sounds, the crickets, they'd all gone silent too. The silence was almost worse. I stayed like that, curled up in a ball for what felt like hours, until the sky started to get light. When I finally got the nerve to uncurl and look, there was nothing, no tracks that I could see clearly in the pine needles. None of my stuff was touched. My food bag was still hanging from a tree 20 yards away. It hadn't been interested in my food. It had been interested in me. I packed up my gear so fast my hands were shaking. I hiked out to Yosemite Falls, my head on a swivel the whole time, jumping at every little noise. I ended up hitchhiking back to my truck because there was no way I was spending another minute out there after dark. Some tourists in a VW bus gave me a ride. They were all laughing and happy, and I just sat in the back silent, staring out the window. I got to my truck just as the sun was dipping below the trees. It was that deep blue hour, not quite night, but not day. I was fumbling with my keys, my back to the woods, and that's when I heard it, from the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. It was a sound I can't properly describe. It wasn't a growl, it was lower than that. Deeper. It was guttural, like rocks grinding together deep in the earth, but it had this vocal quality to it. It was a voice, but not a human one. It was a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight into the primitive part of my brain, the part that knows what being prey feels like. That sound held pure, undiluted terror. It was a threat, a warning, and a promise all rolled into one. I didn't look. I didn't turn around. I wrenched the truck door open, scrambled inside, and jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying, not caring about anything except putting as much distance between me and that sound as possible. I told myself it was a bear, a weird bear. I had to believe that or I'd have lost my mind. For a few weeks I almost convinced myself, but then I went to Sequoia. I don't know why. Stubbornness maybe, a need to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. It was a stupid thing to do. I'd done a long, brutal hike that day, up into some high country most people don't bother with. I was exhausted. I had a camper shell on the back of my pickup, so I decided to just sleep in the truck bed. It felt safer than being on the ground. I had my sleeping pad and bag set up, and I was out almost as soon as I lay down. I was dreaming about something normal, I don't remember what, when the world exploded. The whole truck started shaking, violently, not a wobble, not a rock. This was a side-to-side lurching, like someone had a grip on the bumper and was just heaving it back and forth. The entire vehicle was rocking on its springs. I was thrown against the sidewalls of the camper shell, my head smacking the fiberglass. Gear was flying everywhere, my backpack, a cooler, a canteen, all of it crashing around inside this metal and fiberglass box. I was disoriented, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. My first groggy thought was earthquake, but it wasn't. This was too rhythmic, too focused. This was being done. The shaking stopped for a second, just long enough for the silence to feel even more terrifying. And in that silence, I heard a low, rumbling breath from right outside. I was lying on my back. I opened my eyes. The back window of the camper shell was maybe 3 feet from my face. It was a square of slightly less darkness, and then that darkness was blotted out. A face was looking in at me. It had to bend down to see inside. The head was massive, conical, with dark, stringy hair matted against it. The face, it wasn't ape-like. That's what everyone says, but it wasn't. It was flatter. The nose was huge, wide and flat, like a smashed piece of clay in the middle of its face. The eyes, God, the eyes. They were deep set, but they held a light. Not a glow, but a sharp, intelligent awareness. It was looking right at me. It knew I was in there. It knew it had just shaken me awake. Its face was so close to the glass that its breath fogged it up in little patches. I could smell it, even through the window. A musky, wet dog, earthy smell, but stronger, ranker, like old meat and damp soil. I stopped breathing. Every cell in my body was screaming, this was it. This was the thing from Yosemite. It had found me. Here's the part that haunts me the most. The part that makes me feel like a coward, even now, 40-some years later. I was armed. I was always armed. In the footwell of the cab, just behind my head, I had a .3006 rifle, a serious hunting rifle that could drop a moose. In a holster clipped to the side of the camper shell, within arm's reach, I had my .44 Magnum revolver. I could have reached either one. I could have put a round through that window. I didn't move. I couldn't. The fear was a physical weight on my chest, pinning me to the sleeping bag. It wasn't just the size of it, though it was immense. I'd guess 8 feet tall, easy. It was the look in its eyes. It wasn't the mindless rage of a predator. It was a calm, curious, powerful scrutiny. It was studying me. I was a bug in a jar, and it was wondering what I would do. We stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. Me, frozen in sheer, pants-wetting terror, and it, this monstrous thing, just staring in, its huge, flat face filling the window. Then, slowly, it straightened up. I watched its head and shoulders disappear from view. I heard a single heavy footstep in the gravel, then another. It was walking away. Not running, just walking, calm as you please, back into the woods. I lay there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just trembling. I was drenched in a cold sweat. When I finally could move, I scrambled into the front seat, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't bother with my gear, I just drove. I drove all night back to the base, staring into the rearview mirror the whole time, expecting to see that shape following me down the highway. I never went back to those woods alone. I never told anyone. Who would have believed me? They'd have thought I was crazy, or drunk, or both. I finished my tour and got the hell out of California. I live in Colorado now. Nice, open spaces. I haven't seen anything since. But I think about that face in the window all the time. I think about the way it looked at me. I think about the sheer physical power it took to shake a 3/4-ton pickup truck like it was a toy. And I know, with a certainty that sits like a cold stone in my gut, that it was real. It was Bigfoot. and it knew I was there. It was letting me know it knew. I still don't know why it didn't just rip that camper shell off like a tin can. I guess I'll never know. I just know I've never been that scared before or since, and I hope to God I never am again. Story 9. The afternoon was long. I'd been trekking since sunrise and my legs were tired, a real deep ache in the muscles. I hadn't seen much. A few squirrels, some fresh moose sign, but no grouse. I decided to make camp while I still had some light. I found a good spot under a big, sprawling spruce tree. Its branches were thick and low to the ground, creating a kind of natural shelter. I shrugged off my pack, and the relief was immediate, the straps having dug deep grooves into my shoulders. I remember the smell, that sharp, clean scent of spruce sap and damp earth. I got a small fire going, nothing fancy, just enough to boil some water for coffee and a dehydrated meal. As night fell, the temperature dropped like a stone, the way it only can in Alaska. The air got crisp, and the sounds of the day, the birds, the squirrels, just vanished, replaced by this profound silence that's never really silent. You start to hear your own heartbeat. Earlier that day, I'd had a run-in with a black bear. It was a young one, probably a 2-year-old, browsing in a berry patch about 50 yards away. It saw me, stood up on its hind legs to get a better look, and I just stood my ground and shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" It dropped down and loped off into the brush. My heart was hammering for a minute afterward, a good clean shot of adrenaline. At the time, I remember thinking, that's the scare for the day. I actually felt pretty good about it, handling it calmly. I'd spent years in the bush. A bear encounter was part of the deal. It was a known quantity. I had no idea how trivial that fear would seem in a few hours. I finished my meal, doused the fire thoroughly, pouring my leftover coffee on it and stirring the ashes until they were cold and dead. The last thing you want is a forest fire. I crawled into my sleeping bag, the nylon cold against my cheek, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. The tiredness from the hike just pulled me under. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. Well, after midnight. The moon was out, a sliver, so it was mostly dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough to see the shapes of the trees against the slightly less black sky. I didn't wake up slowly. It was instant. 1 second I was dead asleep. The next I was wide awake, every nerve in my body screaming. It was a prickling sensation, like 1,000 tiny needles running up my spine and over my scalp. My hair was literally standing on end, and then I heard it. Something was moving around my camp. It wasn't close, not right on top of me, but it was big. I could tell by the sound. It was about 30, maybe 40 feet away, just outside the ring of my little camp. It was walking, and it was circling me. I lay there frozen, not even daring to breathe too loud. I was on my side, facing out, and I could hear it moving clockwise around me. The ground was covered in a carpet of dead aspen leaves from last fall, dry and brittle. The sound was a slow, deliberate crunch, 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 with a pause, then another crunch. Between the steps, I heard this other sound, a soft, shuffling drag, like something was being pulled along the ground. My mind was racing, trying to place it. A moose. No. Moose walk with a more distinct clomping sound. A bear. Bears don't walk in perfect, patient circles, and they don't walk on 2 legs for that long. But that's what this was. I could track its movement by the sound of its footsteps. It was bipedal, 2 legs. There was no mistaking the rhythm of it. Left foot, crunch. Right foot, crunch. And that faint shh of a drag. It completed 1 full loop around me. I heard it go past the foot of my sleeping bag, continue around behind my head, past the spruce tree, and come back around to my front again. My heart wasn't just pounding. It was a frantic, wild drumming in my chest and my ears, so loud I was terrified it would hear it. I've never felt fear like that, not in all my years of hunting, fishing, and just being out in the wilderness. This was different. This was a deep, primal, gut-level terror, the kind that feels ancient. I was prey. I was lying in my mummy-style sleeping bag, and I felt so exposed, so helpless. I had my rifle right beside me, leaned up against the spruce tree, but the thought of moving, of unzipping the bag, of sitting up and making a sound was utterly unthinkable. I was paralyzed. I just lay there listening, my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness where I knew it was. It started its second circle. Crunch, shuffle, crunch, shuffle. It was during this second loop that I heard the other sound, a low muttering. It wasn't a growl, not like a bear. It was deeper, guttural, like rocks grinding together deep underground. It was so low I felt it more than heard it, a vibration in my bones. It wasn't constant. It would come in little bursts under its breath, like it was talking to itself, or maybe about me. That sound, that muttering, added a whole new layer to the dread. This wasn't just an animal. There was a mind there, something that was thinking. The fear was so physical. My mouth was desert dry. My muscles were clenched so tight they were starting to cramp, but I didn't dare move to relieve them. I could feel the cold sweat beading on my forehead and trickling down my temple. Every time a branch would snap under its foot, I'd flinch internally, a full-body jolt that I somehow managed to keep contained. It completed the second circle and began a third. The muttering continued, a little louder now, a little more agitated. The footsteps seemed heavier. I was certain it was getting closer. The air felt thick, charged, like before a lightning strike. I knew I couldn't just lie there. It was going to keep circling, or it was going to decide to come in. I had to do something, and then, from some deep, forgotten corner of my mind, a piece of old folklore surfaced. Something my grandfather, who was part Tlingit, had told me years and years ago when I was just a kid. He said, if you're ever in the deep woods and you feel something watching you, something that isn't right, you should show you mean no harm. You talk to it, you acknowledge it. It sounded crazy, but I was out of options. My voice was gone, trapped in my throat by the fear. I had to force it out. I wet my lips, which did nothing because my tongue was just as dry. And I whispered. It was barely audible, a raspy breath of sound. I mean no harm. I whispered into the darkness, toward the sound of the footsteps. I'm just passing through. I mean no harm. I don't know what I expected. For it to charge? For the muttering to get louder? What happened was nothing. And everything. The footsteps stopped. Just like that. In the middle of a step. The crunch that should have come next didn't happen. The low muttering cut off. The silence that fell was heavier and more terrifying than the sounds had been. It was a waiting silence, a listening silence. I held my breath, my entire body rigid. I was straining to hear anything, any little sound. Did I anger it? Was it now standing perfectly still, 30 feet away, looking right at me? I couldn't see it. The darkness under the trees was absolute, but I could feel its presence. It was still there. I could feel the weight of its attention on me, a physical pressure. Then I heard a single deep sniff, a loud, wet drawing in of air, like it was sampling my scent from where it stood. And then movement, but not toward me. It turned. I heard the leaves crush under its pivot, and then it started moving away. It wasn't walking this time, it was a trot, a fast, two-legged loping gait. Crunch, 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 crunch. The footsteps, with that same shuffling drag between them, receded quickly, heading downhill, away from my camp. I lay there, still frozen, listening as the sound grew fainter and fainter. The trot seemed effortless, powerful. Within maybe 20 seconds, the last echo of a crushed branch faded away, and then there was only the normal night silence again. But it wasn't normal anymore. The woods felt different, empty in a way that felt wrong. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't get up to look for tracks. I didn't reach for my rifle. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, staring into the black, listening so hard my ears started to ring. The rest of the night, was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep another wink. Every little noise, the rustle of a leaf, the creak of a tree, made my heart leap into my throat. I watched the sky through the branches of the spruce, waiting for the first hint of dawn. It took forever. The black slowly, imperceptibly, turned to grey, and then to a pale, watery blue. Only when I could clearly see the individual needles on the spruce branches above me did I finally, slowly, sit up. My body was stiff and sore from being clenched tight for hours. I looked around my camp. Nothing was disturbed. My pack was where I left it. My rifle was still leaning against the tree. Everything was exactly as it had been. My eyes went to the ground where I had heard it walking. The carpet of leaves was there, but from my vantage point I couldn't see any distinct tracks. I should have gone over to look. I know I should have. Any other day I would have. I'm a hunter. Tracking is what I do. But I didn't. I just couldn't make myself go over there. The memory of that circling, that muttering was too fresh, too raw. The fear was still coiled in my gut, a cold, hard knot. I packed my gear up as fast as my shaking hands would allow. I didn't bother with breakfast. I didn't even have a sip of water. I just shoved everything into my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and I started walking. I didn't look back. I hiked out of that valley as fast as I could, not on any trail, just heading south, toward the road. I didn't stop until I was standing on the gravel shoulder, breathing hard, with the sun fully up. I never went back into those particular side valleys. I still hunt, but I stick to more familiar, more open areas now. I never told my wife the whole story. I just said I'd had a bad feeling and came back early. How do you explain something like that? How do you explain the feeling of something intelligent circling you in the dark? Something that walks on two legs but isn't a man. Something that listens when you whisper to it. I can't. I still can't. I just know what I heard. And I know that the fear I felt that night, that primal, gut-wrenching terror, is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The woods are deep, and there are things in them that we don't understand. I know that for a fact now. Story 10. It was a Tuesday night, or more accurately, super early on a Wednesday morning. I'd guess it was around 3 in the morning. I was dead asleep, the kind of deep sleep where you're just gone, and something jolted me awake. It wasn't a sound I made, it was the dogs. I have 2 of them, a big old German Shepherd mix named Duke and a smaller scrappy mutt named Jack. They're good dogs, protective but not yappy. They bark if a raccoon gets into the trash cans or a deer wanders too close to the fence, but it's usually a few woofs and then they settle down. This was different, this was frantic. It was a sound I'd never heard from them before, a mix of pure terror and this deep guttural rage. It was a full-on panic, a screaming bark that was just non-stop. The hair on my arm stood up immediately. I remember lying there in bed, my heart just hammering against my ribs, trying to listen. The barking didn't let up. It was coming from the backyard. My first thought, the logical one, was a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, or a mountain lion, but this felt different. The dogs didn't sound like they were confronting something. They sounded like they were trying to warn something away. And they were absolutely terrified while doing it. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I fumbled around in the dark for my jeans and yanked them on, then grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I keep on my nightstand. It's one of those big metal ones. Feels solid in your hand, like you could use it as a club if you had to. My heart was still going a mile a minute, a dull throbbing rhythm in my ears. I remember my mouth was dry, chalk dry. I crept out of my bedroom and down the short hall to the back door. The house was dark and silent, except for the insane racket coming from outside. I could hear the dogs pacing back and forth on the wooden deck, their claws clicking frantically. I flipped the deadbolt, the sound way too loud in the quiet house, and pulled the door open. The cold night air hit me like a physical slap. It was that crisp, clean Idaho cold that seeps right into your bones. I flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, a bright white cone that swept across my backyard. The dogs were at the edge of the deck, their bodies rigid, hackles raised so high they looked like different animals. They were both focused on something down by the road, which is about 50 yards from my house. A dirt and gravel track that leads up into the hills. I shone the light down there, but I couldn't see anything at first. Just the familiar shapes of pine trees and the dusty white of the road. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice sounding thin and weak in the vastness of the night. "Get out of here!" The dogs didn't even acknowledge me. They just kept barking, that same desperate, scared sound. Duke was actually trembling. I could see his whole body shaking in the flashlight beam, and then I saw it. My flashlight beam caught movement on the road, maybe 100 yards away, heading uphill. At first, I thought it was a person, a really tall, lanky person running. But the way it was moving was just off. It was running on 2 legs, but its strides were impossibly long. It wasn't a human jog or a sprint. It was this fluid, powerful, loping gait, like it was covering 10 feet with every single step, and it wasn't even trying hard. It was effortless. I stood there, frozen, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. The flashlight beam jittered in my hand because I'd started to shake. I managed to keep it trained on the thing. It was tall, really tall. Well over 6 feet, I'd guess closer to 7, and it was covered in what looked like hair, but not fur, not like a bear. It was like long, shaggy, silvery grey hair, or maybe even shreds of something hanging off its body. It was thin but not skinny, wiry, powerful. In the bright white of my flashlight, the colour stood out stark against the dark road and the black trees. It was a pale silvery grey. Its head was slightly pointed at the top, not like an alien cone head, but just tapered. I couldn't see any facial features from that distance, just a dark patch where a face should be. The most terrifying part was the speed. It was moving up that hill faster than anything I've ever seen on 2 legs. A deer maybe could run that fast, but not a person. Never a person. This was a different kind of motion, a different kind of physics. It was gliding, and then it glanced back. It turned its head just slightly, just for a split second, back over its shoulder towards me and the dogs. I didn't see eyes. I just saw a dark shape, a shadow in the silhouette of its head, but I felt it. I felt its attention on me. It was a conscious, intelligent look. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. A cold dread, colder than the night air, washed down my spine. My breath caught in my throat. That's when the dogs stopped barking. It was instantaneous. 1 second, the night was filled with their frantic noise. The next, it was dead silent. The silence was louder and more frightening than the barking had ever been. I looked down at them. Both dogs had dropped into a crouch, their tails tucked so far between their legs they were almost tucked up into their bellies. Jack let out a low, pathetic whimper, and then they both scrambled backwards, away from the deck railing, and pressed themselves against the wall of the house, trying to make themselves as small as possible. They were shivering, staring out into the darkness with wide, white-rimmed eyes. They were utterly defeated, terrified into submission. My own fear skyrocketed. If whatever that thing was could silence my dogs, 2 brave dogs, just by looking at them, then I was in deep, deep trouble. I was alone out there. I snapped my attention back to the road. The thing was still running, already almost at the crest of the hill. It was going to be out of sight in seconds. I stood there paralyzed, my flashlight beam glued to it. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could barely breathe. I was just a statue made of fear, holding a trembling light. Just before it reached the top of the hill, where the road curves and dips out of view, it reached the edge. And instead of following the road, it leaped. It didn't jump like a man. It didn't take a running start and hurl itself. It was just part of its stride. One moment it was on the road, and in one fluid, continuous motion, it pushed off with its back leg and launched itself off the side of the road, down the steep embankment that drops into a ravine choked with thick brush and pine trees. The embankment is steep, probably a 30-foot drop at that point, covered in loose shale and thorny bushes. A human would break their legs. A human would tumble and crash through the branches. This thing didn't make a sound. No crash, no snap of twigs, no rustle of leaves. It just vanished. It was there in my flashlight beam 1 second. A silvery grey figure in mid-air, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness below. I stood there for I don't know how long. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Time had stopped. The only sound was the blood pounding in my head and my own shallow, ragged breaths puffing out in little clouds in the cold air. The dogs hadn't moved. They were still pressed against the house, silent. Slowly, carefully, I swept the flashlight beam across the road, down the embankment, across the tree line. Nothing. Just stillness, an empty, profound stillness that felt heavier than the noise that had come before. I backed into the house, my movements stiff and jerky. I pulled the door shut, my hands fumbling with the lock. I clicked the deadbolt into place, then checked it again, and again. I went to every window on the ground floor, pulling the curtains shut, peering out into the blackness before closing them. I felt like a child, afraid of the monster outside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on my couch in the dark, the flashlight still clutched in my hand, listening. The dogs eventually crept inside and curled up at my feet, but they didn't sleep either. Every little sound, the creak of the house settling, the wind in the pines, made us all jump. When the sun finally started to come up, turning the sky from black to deep blue to a pale grey, the fear began to loosen its grip, just a little. It was replaced by a weird, shaky curiosity. Had I really seen that? Had I dreamed it? The silence of the dogs felt like proof, but my logical mind was fighting a desperate battle. Once it was fully light out, a proper sunny morning, I made myself go outside. The dogs were hesitant, sticking close to my heels as I walked down towards the road. The world looked normal, peaceful. Birds were chirping. It made the memory of those few minutes feel like a bad dream. I walked to the spot on the road where I'd seen it last. I looked down the embankment where it had leaped. The ground on the road was hard-packed dirt and gravel, no footprints. But at the very edge, right where it had pushed off, the tall, dry grass and weeds were different. They were flattened, not just bent over, but pressed down in a distinct pattern, like something with a lot of weight and power had shoved off from that exact spot. The vegetation was disturbed, pushed aside, and there was a clear, skid-like mark in the dirt at the lip of the embankment. I stared at that spot for a long time. There were no clear footprints, no tufts of hair, nothing you could take a picture of and show to someone as definitive proof. Just this impression, this evidence of a tremendous, powerful push. A push that had launched something massive and heavy down into a ravine without a sound. I never told anyone. Who would I tell? The police. They'd think I was crazy. My buddies at the diner, they'd never let me live it down. I've always been a skeptic. I laughed at those Bigfoot shows on TV. I thought it was all a bunch of hoaxes and misidentified bears. But I know what I saw. I saw something that wasn't human, that wasn't a bear, that wasn't anything from the natural world I understand. It was tall. It was covered in that silvery grey hair. It moved with an impossible, effortless speed, and it silenced my dogs with a glance. It looked back at me. It knew I was there. That sighting, that one quiet Idaho night, shattered my whole worldview. I'm not a skeptic anymore. I'm just a guy who went out into his backyard with a flashlight one night and saw something that I still can't explain. I still live here. I still hear the dogs bark at night, but now when they do, I don't get annoyed. I get a cold knot in my stomach. and I look out the window into the darkness and I wonder if it's ever coming back. I never saw it again, but I know it was real. I know what I saw out there on the road. Story 11. I was about 14 or 15 years old, and it was one of those hot, sticky summer days in Ohio where the air feels thick and heavy, like you're breathing through a wet blanket. Me and a couple of friends, just a small group of us, had decided to go camping near this river we'd heard about from older kids. It wasn't some deep wilderness spot. It was close enough to town that we could bike there, but far enough that it felt like a real adventure. We'd packed our gear in backpacks, stuff like a cheap tent, some snacks and flashlights, and we set up camp in a clearing by the riverbank. The ground was soft and muddy in places, with tall grass and trees crowding in around us. I remember the smell of damp earth and the faint, fishy scent of the river mixing together. That afternoon, we were just messing around, skipping stones and talking about school and dumb stuff when someone suggested wading into the river. The water was shallow, maybe up to our knees in most spots, and it felt cool and refreshing after the heat. We kicked off our shoes and left them on the bank, stepping into the current. The riverbed was rocky and slippery under my feet, and I could feel the tug of the water against my legs. It wasn't fast-moving, just a gentle flow that made soft gurgling sounds as it passed over stones. We were laughing and splashing each other, not paying much attention to anything else. That's when I first heard it, a sharp crack from the opposite bank, like a thick branch snapping. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, because we'd seen squirrels and birds earlier. But then it happened again, and this time it was closer, and it sounded heavier, like whatever it was had weight to it. I stopped wading and looked over at my friends. They'd heard it too. One of them pointed toward the trees on the other side. The river wasn't wide, maybe 30 or 40 feet across, so we could see the opposite bank clearly. It was dense with bushes and taller trees, shadows pooling between them as the sun started to dip lower. We kept wading, but slower now, and I felt this weird prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Something was moving parallel to us on the opposite bank, keeping pace with our slow progress through the water. It wasn't smooth or graceful. It was clumsy, like it was pushing through underbrush, and I could hear more branches cracking and leaves rustling. My heart started beating faster, and I whispered to my friends, "Do you see that?" They nodded, their faces tense. We all stopped wading completely, just standing there in the middle of the river, the water swirling around our legs. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows, and the light had that golden, hazy quality that makes everything look a bit unreal. We stood frozen for what felt like minutes, but it was probably only seconds. Then, from the tree line on the opposite bank, something stepped out. It was tall, so tall that my brain struggled to make sense of it at first. I'd say it was around 8 feet high, maybe even more, and it was covered in this reddish-brown hair that looked matted and thick, like an old rug left out in the rain. It stood completely motionless, just watching us. Its arms were long and hung down by its sides, and I couldn't see its face clearly because of the shadows, but I got the impression of something broad and dark where its head should be. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold dread wash over me, worse than the river water. One of my friends let out a choked sound, like a gasp, and we all started backing away slowly, still in the water. We didn't say anything. We just moved, our feet slipping on the rocks, but as we backed up, the thing moved too. It took a step forward, matching our pace, and I heard its footsteps, heavy, thudding sounds that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't running or charging, it was just following us, and that made it even scarier, like it was deliberate, like it knew exactly what it was doing. The water was up to our thighs now, and I could feel the current pulling at me, but I was too scared to care. My legs felt weak like jelly. and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We kept backing away, our eyes locked on that thing, and it kept coming, step by step. Then, one of my friends whispered, "Run." And that's when we turned and started splashing through the water as fast as we could. The river bottom was uneven, and I stumbled a couple of times, my hands scraping against sharp rocks. Water splashed up into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't stop. We were heading for the bank where we'd left our shoes. And beyond that, there was an apartment complex maybe a couple hundred yards away. I'd never been so glad to see buildings in my life. As we scrambled out of the water, soaking wet and panting, I glanced back. The thing was still on the opposite bank, but it was moving faster now. It stepped into the river, and I heard this huge splash as it waded in. The water wasn't deep for us, but for something that tall, it must have been up to its waist or higher. It moved through the current like it was nothing, and then it let out this sound, a long, low howl that seemed to tear through the air. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more guttural, and it had this vibrating quality that made my bones feel like they were shaking. For a second, we all froze again, just staring, and I felt this icy fear grip me so tight I couldn't move. Then the howl stopped, and we snapped out of it. We grabbed our shoes, didn't even put them on, just clutched them in our hands, and started running toward the apartment complex. The ground was muddy and uneven, with patches of grass and weeds, and I could feel twigs and stones digging into my bare feet. I didn't care. I just ran, my lungs burning, my wet clothes clinging to me and making it harder to move. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps splashing through the river and then thudding on the bank. I risked another look back, and my stomach dropped. The thing was out of the water now, standing at the edge of the woods on our side, just watching us again. It was closer than before, and in the fading light I could see more details. The way its hair was clumped in places, the sheer bulk of its body. It didn't run after us, but it didn't need to. Its presence was enough to send us into a full-blown panic. We sprinted across the open field toward the apartments, our feet slapping against the pavement as we hit the parking lot. I remember the feel of the rough asphalt under my bare feet, the sting of little cuts I must have gotten from running. We didn't stop until we were banging on the door of the first building we reached, shouting for help. Someone let us in, an older guy who looked confused and annoyed, but we were too freaked out to explain properly. We just stood there, dripping wet and shaking, trying to catch our breath. Later, we calmed down enough to tell him what happened, but he just shrugged and said it was probably a bear or something, but I knew it wasn't. Bears don't stand on two legs like that, and they don't make sounds like that howl. We stayed at his place for a while, until we felt safe enough to call our parents to pick us up. We left all our camping gear behind, the tent, our backpacks, everything. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept replaying that moment in my head, the sight of that thing standing there watching us. 2 days later, we went back with my dad to get our stuff. It was daytime and the sun was bright, but I still felt uneasy. The campsite was exactly as we'd left it, but the tent was torn in a few places, like something had been poking at it. We packed up quickly, not saying much, and I kept glancing toward the river, half expecting to see it again. But there was nothing, just the normal sounds of birds and the river flowing. We never talked about it much after that, but it stuck with me. Even now, years later, I can still hear that howl in my dreams sometimes, and I get chills thinking about how close we were to something I can't explain. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and wild, and I don't think I'll ever forget the fear of that day. Story 12. Okay, so I've never written this down before, and honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm doing it now. I guess I just need to get it out, to put it somewhere other than my own head, where it's been rattling around for a while. This happened to me, and I know how it sounds. I do, but it's true. It was early June, a few years back. I'd driven up the west coast of Vancouver Island, ended up at China Beach. I just needed to get away from everything for a bit. My life in the city felt like it was closing in on me. All the noise and the constant pressure. So I packed a tent, a sleeping bag, a cooler with some basic food, and just went. I didn't have a real plan. I just wanted to wake up and hear the ocean, you know, not an alarm clock. I'd been there for a couple of days already. It was a simple rhythm. Wake up with the sun, make some coffee on my little camp stove, sit on a log and just watch the waves. Walk the beach, read a book, collect some firewood for the evening. It was the kind of quiet that starts to feel like a physical thing, a weight lifting off your chest. The day it happened was one of those perfect, crisp, coastal days. The sky was this hard, clear blue, and the sun was warm, but not hot. There was a breeze coming off the water that kept the air fresh. I remember the sand was still cool under my bare feet, even though it was probably mid-morning. I was just puttering around my campsite, which was just a flat spot in the sand above the high tide line, tucked right where the beach met the tree line. The forest there is dense, a real wall of green, cedar, hemlock, fir, all tangled up with salal and ferns. It's dark in there, even on a bright day. I was tidying up from breakfast, rinsing my plate with a bit of water from my jug. I remember bending over, shaking the droplets off the plastic plate, and when I straightened up, that's when I saw it. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a wrong shape, down the beach to my left, maybe 150 feet away. It was where the trees come right down to the sand, creating a little point. Then my eyes focused and my breath just stopped in my throat. It was tall, so damn tall, and it was just out on the beach. It hadn't been there a second ago. It must have just stepped out of the woods. It was dark, almost black, but not a solid black. It was like a dark brown, so deep it looked black against the pale sand and the bright green of the trees. The sun was behind me, so it was fully illuminated. There was no mistaking what I was looking at. It was walking, not toward the water, but parallel to the tree line, its back to me. It had this rolling gait. It wasn't clumsy, it was powerful. Its arms were long, swinging naturally, and the shoulders were massive, hunched. The whole body was covered in this long, shaggy hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was stringier, matted in places. I could see the muscles working under it as it moved. I was frozen, completely frozen. My hand was still clutching my wet plate. I think I'd stopped breathing. My heart wasn't even pounding yet. It was like my whole system had just shut down in disbelief. This can't be real. This can't be real, was the only thing looping in my head. It hadn't seen me. It was just moving with a purpose, like it had somewhere to be. I could hear the crunch of its feet on the sand and gravel. It wasn't a quiet sound. It was heavy, substantial. This wasn't some ghost. This was a physical thing, a solid animal that weighed a lot. I could see the impressions its feet were leaving in the damp sand closer to the water. I stood there, maybe for 5 seconds, maybe for 30. Time got weird. I was taking in details without even meaning to. The way the hair on its back was longer, almost like a mane, the width of its back, the fact that its head was sort of conical, not round like a human's. I remember thinking stupidly that its ears must be flat against its head because I couldn't see them. And then it stopped. It just stopped dead in its tracks. It didn't turn its head slowly. It didn't sniff the air like in a movie. It just went from a steady walk to a complete, rigid halt. Its whole posture changed. It went from relaxed movement to this intense, coiled alertness. It knew I was there. The fear hit me then, a cold wave that started in my gut and flashed out to my fingers and toes. My heart kicked into a frantic, hammering rhythm against my ribs. My mouth went dry. It started to turn. It didn't spin around, but it was fast. It pivoted on one of those huge feet, its whole upper body swinging towards me, and I saw its face. I didn't see glowing red eyes or fangs. It was worse than that. It was intelligent. The eyes were dark, deep set under a heavy brow ridge. They locked onto me. There was no anger there, no aggression I could name. It was a look of pure, assessing awareness. It was looking at me the same way I might look at a deer I'd surprised in the woods. A calculation, a recognition of another living thing, and a decision being made. The face was mostly dark, like the rest of it, but the skin around its eyes and on its lower face was a darker, leathery grey. Not pink. It had a wide, flat nose. Its mouth was a firm line. It wasn't snarling. It was just looking. That moment of eye contact lasted less than a second, but it felt like an hour. In that tiny slice of time, every story, every myth, every joke I'd ever heard about Bigfoot evaporated. This wasn't a legend. This was an animal, a real, breathing creature, and I was standing way too close to it. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It turned its body fully away from me, back toward the forest, and in 2 strides it was at the edge of the trees. Its movement was so fluid, so unnaturally quick for something that size. It didn't crash through the undergrowth, it just melted into it. 1 second it was there, a massive black shape against the green, and the next it was gone. The ferns swayed where it had passed, and then they were still. I was left standing there, alone on the beach. The sound of the waves came rushing back, a sound I hadn't even realized I'd blocked out. The cry of a gull overhead sounded violently loud. I was still clutching my plate. My knuckles were white. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at the spot where it had disappeared. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get in my car and drive and never look back. But my legs felt like they were made of wet sand. They were trembling so hard I was afraid they'd buckle. Slowly, carefully, like I was made of glass, I turned my head, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just the normal, dappled shadows of the forest. But it felt different now. The forest wasn't just a beautiful backdrop anymore. It was a place that could hide that. It felt deep and ancient and full of things I didn't understand. I finally managed to take a step backward, then another. I didn't turn my back on the trees. I kept my eyes glued to that spot, retreating until I bumped into my camp chair and nearly fell over. I sank into it, my whole body shaking. I sat there for maybe an hour, just staring at the trees. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, probably just the normal sounds of the forest, made me jump. My heart rate wouldn't go back to normal. The adrenaline had left me feeling hollowed out and nauseous. I kept replaying it in my head. The initial sight of it, the way it moved, the moment it stopped, the look in its eyes. The details were burned into my mind. The way the sun had glinted off its dark, matted hair, the sheer bulk of it, the absolute silence with which it vanished. I thought about going over to look at the footprints. The logical part of my brain was yelling at me, "Get evidence! Take a picture of the tracks!" But the animal part of my brain, the part that had just looked into the eyes of something that could easily tear me apart, refused. I wasn't going anywhere near that tree line. Eventually, the practical need for a plan cut through the shock. It was still morning. I had a whole day ahead of me, and suddenly the idea of spending another night here in the dark, with that thing possibly still nearby, was utterly terrifying. I started packing up my camp. My movements were jerky, rushed. I didn't fold my tent neatly. I just yanked out the pegs, stuffed the whole thing still half covered in sand into its bag. I threw my cooler and stove into the back of my car. I kept looking over my shoulder, my ears straining for any sound that was out of place. The whole time, the beach felt different. The peace was gone. The beauty was still there, but it was a threatening beauty now, like a painted veil over something primal and unknown. The ocean's roar sounded like a warning. When everything was packed, I stood by my car door, keys in hand. I took one last look down the beach, at the spot where I'd seen it. The sand was empty. The waves rolled in and out, erasing any trace it might have left. It was as if it had never been there at all, but I knew it had. The memory wasn't just visual. It was a physical memory in my body, the tightness in my chest, the weakness in my legs, the dry-mouthed fear. You can't fake that. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't stop until I was back on the main highway, surrounded by other cars. The normalcy of it all felt bizarre. I never told the park rangers. What would I say? Hey, I saw a Bigfoot on China Beach. They'd nod, maybe make a note, and think I was another crazy tourist. I didn't tell my friends for a long time, and when I did, I downplayed it. I saw something weird, probably a bear, I'd say, but they could see it in my eyes that I didn't believe that. That encounter changed something in me. It shrank the world a little, but in a strange way, it also expanded it. We think we have everything mapped out, explained, catalogued. We don't. There are still corners, even in a place as seemingly tame as British Columbia, where things that shouldn't exist do. I went to the beach looking for peace and quiet, and I found something else entirely. I found out that the woods have eyes, and sometimes they look back. Story 13. Okay, I'm just gonna type this out. I've never written it all down before, and honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm doing it now. Maybe because it's been 3 years. And I still think about it every single time I close my eyes to sleep. Maybe if I get it out, it'll help, or maybe it'll just make it all real again. But I need to tell someone who might get it, who might not just call me crazy. So, this was 3 years ago, late October. My neighbor, let's just call him my neighbor because I don't want to use his name. He's a big hunter, been doing it his whole life. I'm not really. I've gone out with him a handful of times, mostly just to get out of the house, you know. My wife had been visiting her sister up north for a week, and the silence in the house was starting to get to me. So when he asked if I wanted to go out to this spot, he knew deep in the green swamp area, I said yes. We left around 2 in the afternoon. It was one of those Florida days that looks perfect but feels heavy. The air was thick and wet, the kind that makes your shirt stick to you before you've even done anything. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, but you could smell rain coming from a long way off. The drive was long, mostly dirt roads that shook the truck, dust pluming up behind us so thick it looked like fog. We didn't talk much. He was focused, and I was just watching the trees get thicker and taller, the world outside the window getting darker and greener. We got to the boat ramp around 4. It wasn't a proper ramp, just a muddy cut in the bank where he'd launched his flat-bottomed John boat before. The water was black, like strong tea, and you couldn't see more than an inch below the surface. The cypress knees stuck up out of the water like bony fingers. We loaded our gear into the boat, just a couple of rifles, some water, the hunting blind, which was basically a big canvas bag with mesh windows, and a cooler with sandwiches. The boat ride was maybe 20 minutes, puttering along this narrow, winding channel. The sound of the little outboard motor was the only loud thing. Everything else was just the swamp breathing. The buzz of insects, the occasional splash of a gator sliding off a log, the weird cries of birds I didn't know the names of. He cut the engine way before I expected him to, and we drifted the last 100 yards or so to this little piece of high ground he called an island. It was just a hump of land, maybe 50 feet across, covered in saw palmetto and a few big live oaks. We dragged the boat up into the brush, well hidden, and then hauled the blind to the edge of the island, facing a wider part of the swamp. We set it up between 2 big oaks, and it just sort of melted into the background. We got inside, unzipped the mesh windows, and got settled. It was cramped, hot, and smelled like mildew and bug spray. For the first hour or so, it was normal, boring even. The sounds were constant. Cicadas droning, frogs croaking, the rustle of things in the leaves. We sat there not talking, just watching. I remember the light starting to change, getting that long golden late afternoon look. Shadows stretched out, and the air got a tiny bit cooler. I was just starting to feel that calm you get, that quietness in your head where you're not thinking about work or bills or anything. I was just watching a dragonfly hover over the water, and then it stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing, it was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second the world was full of noise, and the next it was just gone. The cicadas cut out mid-drone, the frogs went silent, the birds, everything. The only sound was the blood pulsing in my own ears. I remember looking over at my neighbor, and his eyes were wide. He held a finger to his lips. I didn't need him to. I wasn't about to make a sound. My heart started thumping hard against my ribs, a dull, fast beat that felt too loud for the silence. I could feel the sweat on my back go cold. This wasn't right. I'd been in the woods when a predator comes through, a bobcat, a bear once up in Georgia. The woods go quiet, but it's not like this. This was a deep, heavy, pressing silence. It felt like the whole swamp was holding its breath. That's when we heard the footsteps. They were heavy, not like a deer, light and quick, not like a bear, which is more of a lumbering shuffle. These were slow, deliberate, crunching steps. Each one was a distinct sound. Crunch, pause, crunch. Like something massive was stepping on and breaking branches. And it was getting closer. The sound was coming from the other side of the water, from the thickest, darkest part of the woods over there. I remember my mouth was so dry I couldn't have swallowed if I tried. My neighbor had his rifle up, but he wasn't aiming at anything. He was just scanning the tree line, his knuckles white on the stock. I could feel the vibrations from the footsteps through the ground. It was that heavy. It wasn't just a sound in the air. I could feel it in the soles of my boots. Then the steps stopped, right across the water from us, maybe 70, 80 yards away. The silence came back, even heavier than before. It felt like we were being watched. I could feel the hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. I was straining my eyes, trying to see anything in the shadows between the trees, but it was just a wall of green and black. That's when it started moving again, but it wasn't walking, it was running. The sound of the footsteps changed from that slow crunch to a full-on, ground-shaking thump, thump, thump. It was crashing through the underbrush, and it was coming straight for the water. My brain was screaming, "Bear, it's a bear, a big bear." But I just knew it wasn't. Bears don't run like that. The rhythm was wrong. It sounded like a man running, but a man the size of a grizzly. It hit the water. There was a huge splash, and then the sound changed to a powerful churning thwump, thwump, thwump as it waded across the channel. The water wasn't that deep, maybe chest high on a person, but whatever this was, it was plowing through it like it was nothing. It was coming right at our little island, right at us. I think I stopped breathing. My neighbor had his rifle shouldered now, pointed in the general direction of the noise, but he was shaking so bad the barrel was wobbling. I remember the blind felt flimsy, like a paper bag. It offered no protection, none. The sound of it leaving the water was a sucking, muddy noise. It was on our island. We could hear it maybe 30 yards away, just on the other side of a thicket of palmetto. It had stopped again. I could hear it breathing. It wasn't panting like a dog. It was a deep, wet, rumbling sound, like air moving through a huge pipe. Huh, huh, huh. And then it roared. It wasn't a roar. It was a boom. A howl and a boom mixed together. It was so loud it wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. The air in the blind vibrated, the canvas walls shuddered, my ears popped. It was a deep, guttural, screaming sound that dropped down into a bass note I felt in my teeth. It was pure rage, it was a challenge. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life, before or since. It didn't sound like any animal. It sounded intelligent and pissed off. The sound seemed to go on forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. When it stopped, the silence rushed back in, but it was a broken silence. My ears were ringing. I realized I had my hands clamped over my ears, and I was curled into a ball on the floor of the blind. My neighbor was in a similar position, his face pale as a ghost. We just stared at each other. There were no words. There was nothing to say. We stayed like that, frozen, for what felt like an hour. The forest was still dead silent. The thing wasn't moving. We couldn't hear it breathing anymore. It was just out there, waiting. The light was fading fast now, the gold turning to deep blue, then to purple. It was getting hard to see details. Finally, my neighbor motioned with his hand. A slow, deliberate movement. "We have to go." I shook my head. No way. No way was I stepping out of this blind. He gestured more urgently, pointing at the darkening sky. If we didn't go now, we'd be navigating the boat channel in pitch black. That was almost as dangerous as whatever was outside. Somehow, I made my legs work. We moved slowly, painfully slowly, unzipping the blind from the inside. The sound of the zipper was like a gunshot in the quiet. We crept out, staying low in the palmetto. We left everything. The blind, the cooler, our rifles, they were just things. We didn't care. The walk to the boat was the longest 50 yards of my life. Every shadow was a monster. Every rustle of a leaf was it coming for us. I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on my back. It's a feeling you can't describe unless you've felt it. It's a weight, a pressure on your spine, a primal knowledge that you are being hunted. I was sweating, but I was cold. My whole body was trembling so hard I had to clench my jaw to keep my teeth from chattering. We got to the boat. My neighbor was fumbling with the knot on the rope, his hands shaking. I was just standing there, my back to the woods, staring into the dark where we'd left the blind. I was the lookout, but I couldn't see anything. It was too dark, and then the feeling got stronger. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a certainty. It was right behind me. I don't know why I turned around. Maybe some deep, stupid part of me needed to see it. Maybe I just had to know. I turned my head slowly, my neck cracking with the tension, and I saw them. About 50 yards back, right at the tree line where we'd been. 2 points of light. They weren't reflecting light. They were glowing, a dull amber color like old honey, and they were high. Way too high. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things were a good foot, maybe more, above where my head would be. They were just floating there in the darkness. They weren't blinking, they weren't moving, they were just fixed on me. I could feel them looking right into me. It was an intelligence. It was a person in there, looking out from behind those eyes. It knew I was looking back. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I just stared at those amber eyes, and they stared back. My brain was screaming, but my body was a statue. Then, in an instant, they were gone. Not like they closed or turned away. They just vanished, and as they did, we heard the footsteps again. Not a walk, not a run, but a full-on, frantic sprint crashing away from us back into the deep woods. The sound of it moving was incredibly fast, smashing through brush and small trees, fading away into the distance within seconds. And as soon as it was gone, the swamp came back to life. The frogs started croaking, an owl hooted, the insects started their droning. It was like someone had flipped the sound switch back on. My neighbor finally got the knot undone. We shoved the boat into the water, scrambled in, and he yanked the pull cord on the motor. It started on the first try, a miracle. He didn't even turn on the running lights. He just gunned it, and we flew down that dark channel, branches whipping at our faces, the boat slamming against the water. I didn't look back. I just held on, my whole body shaking. Those 2 amber eyes burned into my mind. We didn't speak the whole way back. We didn't speak when we loaded the truck. We drove the 2 hours home in total silence. When he dropped me off at my house, he just looked at me and said, "We don't talk about this." And we never have. I never went back. He sold his boat a month later. I still see him. We wave. We talk about the weather or his grandkids. We never, ever mention that day. But I think about it all the time. I think about the silence. I think about the weight of those footsteps. I think about that roar that felt like it was tearing the world in half. And I see those eyes, those glowing amber eyes way up in the dark, looking at me with something I still can't define. It wasn't just an animal, it was something else. And it saw me. It knows I saw it, and I have no idea what it was. Was story 14. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way it happened. I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get it out somewhere people might understand. I'm not a writer, so I'm just going to tell it like it was. It was early November, a Saturday. The air had that cold, clean bite to it that only happens in Michigan after the leaves have mostly fallen. The sky was the color of pale ash, no wind at all. One of those completely still mornings where every little sound seems to travel forever. I was 38 years old, and I'd been hunting these woods with my dad since I was old enough to walk, and now I was doing the same with my own boy. He was 10 that year. We were out for grouse. We'd parked the truck off a 2-track that's more mud and ruts than road. About an hour and a half after sunrise, we'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes, following an old deer trail that cuts through a mix of pines and bare hardwoods. It was quiet. I mean, really quiet. Not even the usual chatter of squirrels. That should have been the first thing that stuck with me. But at the time, I just remember thinking it was a perfect, peaceful morning to be out with my son. I was a few paces ahead of him, my shotgun broken over my arm, safety on, just like my dad taught me. My boy was behind me, doing his best to walk quietly. His own little 20 gauge held the same way. We weren't talking much, just the occasional whisper and a point of a finger towards a likely-looking thicket. The plan was to loop around and be back at the truck by noon for the sandwiches we'd packed. The trail dipped down into a small gully where the ferns were still thick and green, a stark contrast to the brown and grey of the fallen leaves all around them. The trees here were mostly tall, straight pines with a few big oaks mixed in. Their lowest branches were a good 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I remember that detail clearly because of what happened next. We were about to climb out of the gully when we heard it, a rustle. It wasn't a big rustle. It wasn't a crashing in the brush sound you hear when a deer spooks. This was sharper, closer, like something moving through the dry leaves on the ground about 20, maybe 30 yards to our right. It was the only sound in all that silence, so it snapped my head around instantly. My hunter's instinct kicked in. In one motion, I swung towards the sound and brought my shotgun up, my thumb clicking the safety off. It was pure muscle memory. My heart was thumping, but it was a familiar feeling, the good kind of adrenaline you get when you know a bird is about to flush. My shoulder tucked the stock in tight, my cheek pressed against the wood, and my eyes were scanning down the barrel, looking for a flicker of movement, a patch of brown fur, anything. I expected a deer. I was fully prepared to see a whitetail bounding away. But it wasn't a deer. For maybe 3 seconds, my brain tried to process what my eyes were seeing, and it just failed. It was a figure, a dark brown, almost blackish figure, moving between 2 big pine trees. The trees were about 8 feet apart. I know that because I've paced it out in my head 1,000 times since. This thing moved from behind the left tree and passed behind the right one. It didn't run. It didn't walk. Not like a person walks. It was more of a glide, a smooth, powerful, silent glide. It was upright, fully upright, and it was tall. So damn tall, I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least a foot taller than me, maybe more, 7 feet tall, easy. Its body was thick through the chest and shoulders, covered in what looked like long, shaggy, dark brown hair. I didn't see a face. It was turned away from me, and it moved behind that second tree before I could get any kind of a look at its head. Its arms were long, swinging slightly as it moved. The most terrifying part, the part that still makes the hair on my arms stand up, was the silence. It moved over a patch of those green ferns I mentioned. It just glided right over them. It didn't crush them. It didn't make a single sound, not a snap of a twig, not a crunch of a leaf, not a single breath of wind from its movement, nothing, The woods were just as dead silent as they had been a moment before, except now there was this thing in it. It covered the distance between those two trees, which was about 11 yards, in just a few of those long, gliding steps. It moved with an effortless power that was just wrong. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't scared, it was just moving. And then it was gone, vanished behind the trunk of the second pine. My gun was still up, my finger was on the trigger, but I never fired. There was nothing to fire at. It was just gone. The whole thing, from the rustle to it disappearing, couldn't have lasted more than 3 or 4 seconds. I slowly lowered my gun, my hands trembling so bad the barrel was shaking. My heart wasn't just thumping anymore, it was slamming against my ribs like it was trying to get out. I felt cold all over, a deep internal cold that had nothing to do with the November air. I felt the sweat on my back go icy. I looked down at my son. He was staring up at me, his eyes wide, his face pale. He hadn't seen it. His angle was wrong. I was blocking his view, but he had seen my reaction. He'd seen me snap my gun up, and then he'd seen the look on my face as I lowered it. He saw the pure, unfiltered shock and fear that I couldn't hide. "Daddy?" he whispered, his voice small and tight. What was it? I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my eyes locked on the spot where it had been. My mind was racing, trying to find a box to put this in. A bear? No. Bears don't walk fully upright like that, not for more than a step or two, and they sure as hell aren't that tall or that quiet. Their fur is different, shorter, and they make noise. A person in a ghillie suit, a crazy thought, but who would be out here dressed like that, moving like that, silent as a ghost, and why? It made no sense. A deer, my brain, desperately trying to be rational, offered up the idea of a deer leaping. But deer don't leap while staying perfectly upright. Their bodies are horizontal when they jump. This thing was vertical, and it didn't leap, it moved, smoothly and without a sound. The silence was the clincher. I am a lifelong hunter. I know the sounds of the woods. I know what a squirrel sounds like, jumping from one branch to another. I know the weighty, clumsy sound of a raccoon. I know the distinct heavy tread of a deer and the powerful brush-breaking movement of a bear. Everything makes a sound. Everything leaves a trace. This thing had made one initial small rustle and then absolute unnatural silence. I put my arm around my son's shoulders and pulled him close. I could feel him shaking. "I don't know, buddy," I finally managed to say, and my own voice was a strained, unfamiliar croak. I don't know what it was. We stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring at those 2 pine trees. The woods were still silent. It was like all the life had been sucked out of them. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The normal background noise of the forest was just gone. It was a vacuum. My hunting instincts were completely overridden by a more primal one. Get out. Now. I broke my shotgun open, the shells ejecting into my trembling hand. I fumbled 2 new ones out of my vest pocket and slid them in, snapping the gun shut. The sound of the action closing was unnaturally loud in the quiet. "We're going back to the truck," I said, my voice low but firm. I didn't want to scare him more by sounding panicked, but there was no hiding the urgency. I didn't turn my back on that spot. I started walking backwards, pulling my son with me, my eyes glued to the trees. I held my gun at a low ready, my thumb on the safety again. Every shadow between the trees seemed to shift. Every knot on a tree trunk looked like a watching eye. My senses were so heightened, I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. We backed up like that for 50, maybe 75 yards, until the gully was out of sight. Only then did I turn around, but I kept looking back over my shoulder every few steps. I put my son in front of me so I could watch our rear. We didn't talk, we just walked, and we walked fast. The peaceful morning was gone, replaced by a feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The walk back to the truck felt 10 times longer than the walk in. Every snap of a twig under our own feet made me jump. The rustle of our jackets was deafening. I was hyper-aware of everything, my head on a swivel, my grip tight on the gun. My son kept looking back at me, his eyes asking questions I couldn't answer. When we finally broke out of the tree line and saw the old Ford sitting there, I have never felt such a wave of relief. It was like coming up for air after being held underwater. I practically shoved my son into the passenger seat, threw our guns in the back and climbed in, locking the doors the second I was inside. I just sat there for a minute, both hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. My heart was still going crazy. I looked at my son. He was just staring straight ahead, his little hands clenched into fists on his knees. "You okay?" I asked him. He nodded, but he didn't look at me. "What did you see, Dad?" I took a deep breath. How do you explain something like that to your 10-year-old? How do you explain it to yourself? "I saw something," I said, feeling completely inadequate. "It was big, and it was walking on 2 legs, and it didn't make a sound." "Was it a monster?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked out the windshield at the dark wall of trees we'd just escaped from, a lifelong of rational explanations, of science, of knowing the woods, was crumbling. I couldn't call it a monster, that was a kid's word, but I couldn't call it a bear or a man or a deer. My brain had run out of options. "I don't know what it was, son," I said, and that was the honest truth. "I just don't know." I started the truck and got us the hell out of there. We didn't even eat our sandwiches. We just drove home in silence. That was a few years ago now. I'm in my 40s. My son is a teenager. We still go hunting, but not in that particular spot. I've never seen anything like it again, and I hope to God I never do. I've turned it over and over in my mind 1,000 times. I've read things online, listened to stories. I know what people say it might have been, but all I have are those 3 seconds. The image is burned into my brain, the dark brown figure, the impossible height, the way it moved between those 2 trees without a single sound, gliding over the ferns like it wasn't even touching the ground. I was a 38-year-old man, a skeptic, a hunter who thought he knew every secret the woods held. That one quiet morning, I found out I didn't know anything at all. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up some nights, is the feeling that it saw me long before I saw it, and that the only reason we walked out of those woods was because it let us. Story 15. I was driving west on Interstate 7 in Colorado with my spouse and another couple that day. It was cold as hell, probably around 10 degrees. And even though it was getting close to 5 in the afternoon, the light was still pretty bright because of all the snow on the ground and how it reflected off the Colorado River running right alongside the highway. We were all in a good mood, just chatting and laughing about nothing in particular, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked. The mountains dusted with snow, the river flowing steady and dark against the white banks, like a postcard come to life. My spouse was in the passenger seat and our friends were in the back, all of us bundled up because the heater in the car could only do so much against that kind of cold. We'd been on the road for a few hours, heading back from a weekend trip to see some family, and I was just starting to feel that end-of-day tiredness settle in, you know, where your eyes get heavy and the road starts to blur a little. The sky was clear, a deep blue that made the snow seem even brighter, and the sun was low enough that it cast long shadows across the landscape. I had the cruise control set because the road was pretty empty, just us and a few other cars spread out over miles. We were near the 135-mile marker, which I only remember because my spouse had pointed it out earlier when we passed a sign, joking about how we were almost to the next rest stop. The river was right there, maybe 50 feet from the highway, and it was wide and slow-moving, with chunks of ice floating along the edges. I remember feeling grateful for the scenery because it kept me awake. Every time I glanced over, the water seemed to sparkle in the light, and it was just so damn pretty. We were all admiring it, like I said, and I think my spouse was taking photos with their phone, trying to capture the moment. The other couple in the back were talking about maybe stopping for coffee soon, and I was half listening, half focused on the road. Everything felt normal, routine, the kind of drive you do 100 times and never think twice about. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something in the river. It wasn't like I was looking for it or anything. My eyes just drifted over. And there it was, this tall, thin figure walking upright right in the middle of the river, like it was just strolling through the water as if it were a path. My first thought was that it had to be a person, maybe some idiot out for a swim or something, but that didn't make sense because of the cold. Then I realized it wasn't wearing any clothes, not even a coat or anything, and it was covered in what looked like dark matted hair from head to toe. The posture was weird too. It was leaning forward slightly, with these long arms swinging naturally as it moved, almost like how a gorilla walks, but more fluid, more human-like. It was bipedal, no doubt about that, and it was moving at a steady pace, not fast or slow, just walking. The whole thing probably lasted only a few seconds because we were driving at highway speed, but it felt like time slowed down. I remember my heart just dropping into my stomach, and I must have gasped or something because my spouse turned to me and said, "What is it?" But I couldn't get the words out right away. I just pointed, and by then everyone in the car was looking. We all saw it at the same time, I think, because there was this collective intake of breath, like the air got sucked out of the car. The figure was maybe 7 feet tall, I'd guess, and it stood out against the white snow and the dark water because of how dark its hair was. Almost black, and it looked wet or icy, like it had been in the river for a while. There was no equipment, no backpack, no nothing, just this thing walking through the water like it belonged there. I remember the details so vividly because it was so jarring. The way its arms swung in rhythm with its steps, the forward lean making it seem like it was pushing against something, but the river wasn't that deep there, maybe waist high on a person, so it should have been struggling. But it wasn't. It moved smoothly, effortlessly, and that's what made it so creepy. Its head was kind of low, like it was looking down at the water, but I couldn't see its face clearly. Just a general shape, and the hair covered everything. The legs were long and thin, and it took these deliberate steps, not splashing around like a human would in that cold. The temperature was 10 degrees, for God's sake. Any normal person would be frozen solid in minutes, but this thing didn't seem bothered at all. As we drove past, I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, even though the car was warm. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and I had to force myself to keep driving because part of me wanted to stop, to turn around and see if it was still there. But I didn't. I just kept going, and in the rearview mirror I caught a glimpse of it fading into the distance, still walking like it had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. The whole sighting couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like an eternity, and the images burned into my brain like a photograph. As soon as we passed the spot, the car went dead silent for a moment, and then everyone started talking at once. My spouse was the first to speak, their voice shaky. "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" And the woman in the back couple, she said, "It looked like Bigfoot or something." That word hung in the air, and I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the cold outside, but from the sheer weirdness of it. We all started comparing what we saw, and it was the same. Tall, thin, hairy, walking upright in the river, no clothes, no gear. The man in the back said he noticed how long its arms were and how they swung like a person's, but the posture was off, like it was too forward for a human. We were all trying to rationalize it, you know. Maybe it was a bear standing up. But bears don't walk like that for long, and this thing was moving smoothly, bipedally, for the whole time we saw it. Plus, bears aren't that tall and thin. This was lean, almost lanky, like a person who's been stretched out. I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of fear, but also curiosity, like I needed to know what it was. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel it in my chest. A heavy thud, thud, thud that made it hard to breathe normally. The car felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in, and I had to roll down the window a crack just to get some air, but the cold hit me and I rolled it back up fast. We kept driving, but the mood had shifted completely. No more laughing, no more chatting about coffee stops. Everyone was just staring out the windows, like we were expecting to see it again, or maybe something worse. We talked about turning back, but none of us had the guts to do it. What if we found it? What would we do? Call the police and say we saw a monster in the river? They'd think we were crazy. So we just kept going, and the discussion went on for miles, each of us adding little details we remembered. The woman in the back said she saw how the hair on its arms seemed to ripple in the wind, and my spouse mentioned that it didn't leave any footprints in the snow on the riverbank, which was weird because if it came from somewhere it should have, but we didn't see any tracks, just the thing itself, walking in the water like it had appeared out of nowhere. The more we talked, the more it sunk in that this wasn't some random animal or a person in a costume. The temperature was too cold for anyone to be out there without proper gear, and the river was freezing, literally with ice forming along the edges. No one in their right mind would be walking through that, especially not dressed like that, if you could call it dressed. And the way it moved, it was too natural, too effortless, like it was built for that environment. I've spent enough time outdoors to know what animals look like, and this wasn't any animal I've ever seen. It matched those Bigfoot descriptions you hear about, tall, hairy, bipedal. But I always thought those stories were bullshit, something for TV shows and crazy internet forums. Now I'm not so sure. As we drove further away, the fear started to mix with this weird awe, like we'd witnessed something rare and secret. But the terror was still there, lurking under the surface. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing, just the empty road and the river fading into the distance. The sky was getting darker now, the blue turning to purple, and the snow started to look less beautiful and more ominous, like it was hiding things. We eventually pulled over at a gas station a little while later, and we all got out to stretch, but no one wanted to talk about it anymore. We just stood there in the cold, smoking or sipping coffee, avoiding each other's eyes. I remember my hands were trembling when I lit a cigarette, and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm down. The rest of the drive was quiet, and when we dropped off the other couple, they gave us this look like, "Are we ever going to talk about this again?" But we didn't. We just said goodbye and drove home. My spouse and I didn't say much either. We were both lost in our thoughts. When we got home, I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing that figure in my mind walking through the river, and I'd get this jolt of adrenaline that made my skin crawl. I tried to Google it, see if anyone else had seen something similar in that area, but I didn't find much. Just the usual Bigfoot sightings in Colorado, none exactly like ours. That made it even scarier because it felt like our little secret, something that happened just to us. Even now, weeks later, I still think about it every time I drive near a river or see snow. It's left me with this lingering unease, like the world isn't as safe or predictable as I thought. I don't know what that thing was. Maybe it was a Bigfoot, maybe something else. But I do know that it was real, and we all saw it. And that's enough to keep me up at night, wondering what else is out there in those mountains, hiding in plain sight. Story 16. We'd set up camp earlier that day, just a couple of tents and a fire pit we dug ourselves. The ground was damp from recent rain, and the air had that wet earth smell mixed with pine. We were all pumped, you know, being out there without parents, feeling grown up. We brought BB guns, the cheap pump-action kind, because we thought it'd be fun to have a war, stupid kid stuff, but at the time, it felt like the coolest thing ever. As it got dark, we started the game. We split into two teams, me and two others on one side of this ravine and the other two on the opposite side. The ravine wasn't huge, maybe 30 feet across, but it was steep, with a creek at the bottom that trickled softly. We'd been shooting at each other for a while, laughing and dodging behind trees. The BBS stung when they hit, but it was all in good fun. I remember the sound of them pinging off bark, and our voices echoing a little in the quiet. Then, around midnight, things got weird. I was crouched behind a big oak tree trying to spot one of the other guys across the ravine when I heard something behind me, not from the direction of the game, but from deeper in the woods. At first I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but this was different. It was loud, like branches snapping, but not the way a deer would move. Deer are quick and light. This was heavy, deliberate. Each crack sounded like someone was breaking thick sticks one after another, and it was getting closer. I froze. My heart started beating faster, and I felt this chill run down my back. I called out to my friends, my voice shaky. "Hey, you guys hear that?" One of them shouted back, "Hear what?" But then they went quiet too, because the sound kept coming. It wasn't random. It was like something big was pushing through the underbrush, not caring about making noise. That's what got me. Most animals try to be quiet, but this thing wasn't. It was almost aggressive. We all called a truce real quick. No one said it, but we just stopped the game and gathered together on our side of the ravine. The 5 of us huddled up, and I could feel the tension. One of my friends, he had a flashlight, one of those big mag lights, and he shined it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, but the trees were so thick it didn't go far. We could still hear the snapping, closer now, maybe 50 yards away. Then we saw it, or, I should say, we saw the eyes. My friend moved the light, and there up in the trees, way higher than any person or bear would be, were these huge green glowing eyes. I mean, they were massive, bigger than my fists, and they just stared right at us. The green wasn't like a light bulb. It was eerie, almost like they were lit from within, and they didn't blink. They were set apart too, like whatever it was had a wide head. My stomach dropped. I'd never seen anything like it. Not in movies, not in stories. This was real, and it was terrifying. Without thinking, I raised my BB gun and fired. It was pure instinct, like my body took over. I pumped it a couple times and shot toward those eyes. The BBs hit something. I heard the little pings, but the eyes didn't move. They just kept staring. And then the snapping sound started again, even louder. That's when we all lost it. We turned and ran, not in any organized way, just pure panic. We scrambled up the side of the ravine, slipping on wet leaves, our breath coming in gasps. I remember the feel of mud under my shoes and the branches scratching my arms as we pushed through. We hit a fence at the edge of the woods, this old wooden thing that separated the trees from the highway. We didn't even slow down. We just climbed over it, tearing our clothes on the splinters. Once we were on the other side, we were on the shoulder of Interstate 90. Cars were whizzing by, their headlights blinding us for a second. We stood there panting, looking back at the woods. For a minute, I thought we were safe. The sounds had stopped, and the eyes were gone. But then, one of my friends pointed up at the hill behind us. There, silhouetted against the night sky, was this huge figure. It was standing on the crest of the hill, and even from a distance I could tell it was massive. Its arms hung down past its knees, like they were too long for its body. It didn't move, just stood there. And I felt this cold dread wash over me. We all saw it at the same time, and without a word, we started running again. This time, we didn't stop until we reached Route 20, which was about a mile away. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't dare look back. We ended up at a gas station, all of us shaking and trying to catch our breath. We never went back for our stuff, the tents, the sleeping bags, everything was left behind. To this day, I can't explain what we saw. Those glowing eyes, that silhouette. It stuck with me. And every time I'm in the woods, I get this uneasy feeling, like something's watching. Story 17. It was one of those late September days that starts off feeling like summer, but hints at the chill to come once the sun dips below the tree line. I'd gotten off work a couple hours early, and the idea of just sitting at home felt wrong. The rough river was calling. It's my spot, you know. the one place where the world just seems to quiet down. My wife thinks I'm a bit obsessed, and maybe I am, but there's nothing like the sound of the water and the simple hope of a base tugging on your line. I threw my old tackle box, a cooler with a couple of beers and a sandwich, and my rod into the truck. I didn't even change out of my work boots. The drive out to Ohio County is all winding back roads, fields giving way to thick woods that crowd right up against the asphalt. I was headed for a particular bend in the river I'd found last spring, a place where the water deepens under a canopy of sycamores, and the bank is just a narrow strip of gravel and mud before the land shoots up into a steep, clay-heavy hill. It's not an easy spot to get to, which is why I like it. No one else ever bothers. I got there around 4 in the afternoon. The light was that rich golden color that makes everything look painted. I parked my truck on the grassy shoulder of the gravel lane. A good 100 yards or so from the actual riverbank, you have to walk a little path through the woods to get down to the water. I hauled my gear down, the leaves already crunching under my boots, a sure sign that fall was on its way. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, that clean, honest smell of the woods. I set up on my usual flat rock right at the water's edge. The opposite bank was maybe 40, 50 feet across, just a wall of dark, shadowy trees and that sheer, muddy slope. It was already getting dim over there, the sun blocked by the ridge. I cast my line out, the lure plopping softly into the slow-moving current, and I just sat there, letting the peace of the place wash over me. This is the part I always love, that first quiet minute when you're just part of the scenery. I'd been there for maybe an hour. The fish weren't biting, but I didn't really care. I'd cracked open a beer and was just watching the water swirl. The woods were full of their usual sounds, squirrels chattering, the occasional call of a crow, the rustle of leaves from some unseen animal. It was all normal, comfortable. That's when I first noticed something was off. The woods on the other side of the river went dead silent. Not just a little quiet, but the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a weight pressing down on your ears. The squirrels stopped, the birds stopped. All I could hear was the river. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck, that instinctual feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even if you can't see anyone. I shrugged it off. Probably a fox or a coyote moving through, spooking the smaller animals. It happens. Then I heard the crashing. It started deep in the woods on the far bank, a sound of branches snapping and undergrowth being trampled. It was loud. Too loud for a deer, I thought. Deer are graceful. They move through the woods with a delicate precision. This was a panicked, brute force stampede. A few seconds later, 3 deer burst out of the tree line on the opposite bank. They weren't running, they were fleeing. Their eyes were wide and white with terror, their bodies slick with sweat, and they scrambled frantically up the steep, muddy incline. They weren't even trying to be quiet. They were clawing at the mud, slipping, scrambling again, driven by a pure, mindless fear. I'd never seen anything like it. My heart started thumping a little harder in my chest. What the hell could scare a deer that badly? A bear. We don't have many bears around here. The sun had fully set by now, and the twilight was deepening into proper night. I fumbled for my headlamp, a bright LED one I always bring for night fishing. I strapped it to my forehead and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the opposite bank in a stark white circle. The deer were gone, vanished over the ridge. The woods were silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, a waiting silence. I slowly panned the beam of my headlamp across the bank, from the water's edge up towards the top of the ridge. The light swept over gnarled tree roots, patches of ferns, the dark, wet clay of the slope. And then the beam stopped. About halfway up the bank, maybe 30 feet from the water, something was standing. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of the shape. It was just a dark, massive form, taller and broader than any man. I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow from a fallen log. I adjusted the headlamp. tilting my head to center the beam directly on it. That's when the shape moved. It straightened up from a slight crouch, and I swear to God my blood went cold. It was standing on two legs. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8.5 feet tall, maybe more. Its entire body was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was long, shaggy and matted, a dark brownish-black color that seemed to absorb the light. The sheer bulk of its shoulders and chest was unbelievable. They were like boulders, and then the smell hit me. It came across the river on a slight breeze, and it was the most god-awful stench I have ever experienced in my life. It's hard to describe. It was a mix of a rotting carcass, wet dog, and something else. Something musky and foul, like old, sour sweat and decay. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I gagged, my hand going to my mouth. That smell was real, tangible proof that I wasn't just seeing things. We were frozen like that for what felt like an eternity, me sitting on my rock with this blinding light on it, and it standing there on the muddy slope, caught in the beam. I could see its chest moving, rising and falling with slow, deep breaths. I couldn't see its face clearly. The headlamp was reflecting off what might have been its eyes, two faint, dull red gleams, but I could see the powerful set of its jaw. Then it made a sound. It started as a low rumble, so deep I felt it in my bones, more than I heard it with my ears. It was a growl, but not like a dog's. It was a guttural, chesty vibration that seemed to come from the very core of the thing. The growl grew louder, and I could see its chest swell. It was looking right at me. I was paralyzed, my fingers digging into the cold rock I was sitting on. My fishing rod was forgotten, lying at my feet. This was the moment of pure, undiluted terror, the moment that is burned into my brain forever. My headlamp was still fixed right on its chest. I saw the massive ribcage expand, the muscles in its torso bunching up. It took one more deep, audible inhale, and then it exhaled with a violent, forceful hoof. It wasn't a roar. It was an explosive breath, a blast of air meant as a threat. I could see the vapor of its breath in my light, a brief cloud in the cool night air. The sound was primal, a challenge and a warning all in one. It was telling me to get the hell out of there, and then it moved. The bank it was on was steep. It was a near vertical wall of mud and clay, slick from recent rains. I've tried to climb it before for fun and couldn't get more than a few feet up before sliding back down. This thing, it just turned and went up it. It didn't climb. It scaled it in 2 steps. 2 effortless, powerful strides. It dug one huge hand into the mud, its legs propelling it upward with impossible strength, and it just flowed up that impossible slope like it was nothing, like it was walking up a gentle hill. In 2 seconds flat, it was at the top of the ridge. It paused for a split second at the crest, a colossal black silhouette against the slightly less dark sky. It turned its head, and I swear it looked back down at me. Then it was gone, just vanished into the blackness of the woods. The spell was broken. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through my system so violently it felt like an electric shock. I gasped, sucking in a ragged breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Every instinct in my body was screaming one word: run! I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I scrambled to my feet, my legs feeling like rubber. I left everything. My rod and reel, a couple $100 worth of gear, just lying there, my tackle box open on the rock, my cooler with my half-eaten sandwich and the other beer. I didn't care, none of it mattered. I turned and ran for the path. My work boots slipped on the wet stones, and I almost went down, my arms flailing to keep my balance. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was terrified that if I looked back, I would see it coming across the river, or worse, that I would see it standing on the path in front of me. The walk back to the truck through the dark woods was the most terrifying journey of my life. Every shadow was a monster. Every snap of a twig was it coming for me. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I ran, creating dancing, monstrous shapes in the trees. I kept imagining that smell catching up to me, feeling that hot, foul breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the tree line and saw my truck. I've never been so happy to see a vehicle in my life. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I finally wrenched the door open, threw myself inside, and hit the lock button. I slammed the door shut, the solid thunk, a tiny, pathetic shield against what was out there. I sat there in the dark cab, panting, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I stared out the windshield at the dark opening of the path, expecting that huge, hairy figure to come striding out of the woods at any second. My pistol was in the glove box. A little .38 revolver I keep for snakes and, I don't know, general peace of mind. I didn't even think about getting it out. In that moment, staring at the sheer size and power of that thing, the thought of that little pistol was a joke. It would have been like throwing pebbles at a tank. The feeling of absolute helplessness was complete. There was no fighting that. Your only option is to run, to get away. I finally got the key into the ignition and started the truck. I didn't turn on the lights. I was irrationally afraid that the headlights would draw its attention. I threw it into reverse, spun the truck around in a spray of gravel, and sped down that dark lane as fast as I dared. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was back on the main paved road, my headlights finally slicing through the night. I drove home in a complete daze. My hands were still clamped tight on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could still smell that foul odor in my nostrils, like it had seeped into my clothes, into my skin. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my head. The deer scrambling in panic, the massive shape in the light, the deep growl, the explosive exhale, the impossible way it scaled that muddy cliff. I walked into my house, and my wife took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I must have been pale as a ghost. I just shook my head and said I didn't feel well. I went straight to the shower and stood under the hot water for a long time, scrubbing my skin, trying to wash away the memory of that smell and the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I never went back for my gear. It can stay there. I haven't been fishing since. I don't think I ever will again, at least not on the rough river, and definitely not at night. People talk about Bigfoot and you hear stories and you think it's all just campfire tales and hoaxes. You think you'd be curious if you saw one. You're not. There's no curiosity. There's no wonder. There's only a primal, gut-wrenching fear that tells you you are prey and you are in the territory of something you cannot understand. That thing wasn't an animal in the way we think of animals. It was something else, something old and powerful and utterly terrifying. And sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I can still hear that low growl and see its chest heaving in the beam of my headlamp, and I know with a certainty that keeps me awake that it was real. Story 18. It was October of 1987. I remember that specifically because it was the tail end of the year. The air had that real bite to it, and all the leaves were this wet, soggy carpet on the ground. I was in my late 20s, thought I was invincible, you know how it is. My buddy, he had this old family property way out near the Kingsbury Ordnance Plant in Indiana. It wasn't on the plant itself, but right next to it, about 1.5 miles off Hupp Road, the kind of place that feels 100 miles from anywhere. He'd come out with me to set up camp, but he had to head back into town for a family dinner. Said he'd be back later that night. I was fine with it. I liked the solitude, still do for the most part, but not after that. Not like that. So, he takes off in his truck, and I'm there alone. The light was starting to go, that long, deep dusk, where everything turns blue and the shadows get real long and solid. My first order of business was getting a fire going. I was crouched down, my back to the woods, fussing with a bundle of kindling and a lighter that was fighting me. The woods were quiet, not a dead quiet, but the normal kind. A few crickets, the rustle of the wind in the bare branches. It felt peaceful. That's when I heard the first noise. It was off to my left, maybe 25 yards into the trees. A rustling, not a light skittery sound, but a heavy, deliberate crunching through the leaf litter. My first thought, my only thought, was a deer, a big buck maybe. I didn't even turn around. I just kept trying to spark my damn lighter, thinking, "Stupid deer, go on, get out of here." But it didn't go away. The crunching kept going, and it was getting closer. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck, but I shrugged it off. I finally got the kindling to catch, a little wisp of smoke, and I cupped my hands around it, blowing gently. The sound in the woods stopped for a second. Then it started again. Closer, a lot closer, 15 yards maybe. That's when I got that first real jolt of unease. A deer wouldn't just keep coming toward my camp, toward the smell of me and the sound of me. They're skittish. I stood up slowly, my knees popping. I turned around and faced the tree line. It was dark in there, like a wall of blackness past the first few trees. I couldn't see a thing. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice sounding too loud and sharp in the quiet. "Get out of here!" The rustling stopped instantly. Complete silence. For about 3 heartbeats, I felt a flush of satisfaction. See, just an animal. Scared it off. I turned back to my fledgling fire, feeling a little foolish for getting spooked. Then the grunting started. It was low. So low it was almost a vibration in the air, more than a sound. It wasn't a pig, wasn't a bear. I've heard both. This was different. It was guttural, like something clearing a massive, phlegmy throat, and it was close, way too close, that 15 yards felt like 5. My heart just dropped into my stomach. This wasn't right. This was all wrong. The fear came up on me fast, a cold sweat breaking out all over my back under my flannel shirt. My hands were suddenly shaking. I spun back around, my breath coming in little puffs in the cold air. "I've got a gun!" I shouted. It was a lie. I didn't have anything but a lousy pocket knife. But I was desperate. My voice cracked on the word gun. I was trying to sound tough, but I just sounded scared, because I was. I was terrified. The grunting stopped again. The silence that followed was worse. It was a waiting silence, a heavy silence. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkness, my ears straining for any sound. I could hear the blood pounding in my own head. That's when I heard a sharp, distinct crack from the woods, the sound of a branch breaking under real weight, and then something came flying out of the darkness. It wasn't thrown like a baseball, it was lobbed. This heavy, rotten tree stump, all gnarled roots and dirt, just arced out of the blackness and landed with a solid, earth-shaking thump about 8 feet to my left. Dirt and wood chips sprayed my jeans. I actually felt the impact through the soles of my boots. I didn't even have time to process that. My brain was just screaming. Before I could move, before I could even breathe, a second object followed, a log. A big one, thick as my thigh and about 4 feet long. It sailed out of the same spot, tumbling end over end in a way that was almost casual, and landed with another jarring crash just 3 feet in front of me. It bounced once and came to rest, pointing right at me. That was it. That was the moment all rational thought left me, the sheer physical power behind those throws. It was impossible. No man could throw a log that size that far, that easily. No animal I'd ever heard of could do it. The intent behind it was crystal clear. It wasn't a warning shot. The first one might have been. The second one was a statement. The next one hits you. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't grab my pack. I didn't look back. I just turned and bolted down the trail that led back toward Hupp Road. It was a narrow path, overgrown in spots, and the twilight made it a tunnel of shadows. I ran like I've never run before or since. My lungs were burning, my legs pumping, my arms pumping. I was just a raw nerve of panic, focused entirely on the path ahead. I'd made it about 100 yards, maybe. The camp was out of sight behind me. I was starting to think I might actually make it, that the thing, whatever it was staying back in the woods. That's when I heard the new sound. To my right, maybe 20 yards off through the trees, was an old set of railroad tracks that ran parallel to the trail for a stretch. And from over there, I heard the distinct rhythmic sound of rock shifting. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was keeping pace with me. It wasn't just running. It was running with me, matching my speed. It was herding me. The terror that washed over me then was a whole new level. It was a cold, suffocating dread. This wasn't some dumb animal I'd startled. This was something intelligent, something that was hunting me. I slowed down to a jog, my breath sobbing in my throat. I couldn't keep up that sprint. I was exhausted, my side was cramping, and the sheer psychological weight of knowing it was right there, just out of sight, was crushing me. I had to see. I had to know. The trail dipped down into a little hollow, a low spot where the ground was always muddy. As I came down into this dip, the trees on my right thinned out just enough to give me a clearer view of the railroad tracks, and that's when I saw it. It was standing on the raised bed of the tracks, silhouetted against the slightly less dark sky. It was massive. I'm 5'9", and this thing was standing eye level with me, and it was standing on a rail bed that was a good 3 feet above the trail I was on. My brain short-circuited. The math didn't work. It couldn't be that tall, but it was. It was just this huge, dark bipedal shape, broad-shouldered, impossibly wide. It wasn't lanky or stretched out. It was thick, solid, like a powerlifter. It was just standing there, completely still, facing me. I couldn't make out any features, no face, no eyes. It was just a black cutout of something that shouldn't exist, blocking my path forward. I stopped dead. My feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just stared at this thing, this wall of darkness. Time seemed to stop. The whole world shrunk down to that dip in the trail and the shape on the tracks. Then it screamed. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a howl, it was a scream, a high, piercing, hair-raising shriek that seemed to tear right through me. It was full of rage and power, and something else, something ancient and wild. The sound was so loud, so visceral, it felt like a physical force. It hit me in the chest, vibrated in my teeth. I felt my bowels turn to water. The chill that went down my spine was so intense it was painful, like someone had poured liquid nitrogen down my back. That scream broke the spell of paralysis. Pure, unadulterated instinct took over. There was no more trail. There was no more thought. To my left was an open field, recently harvested, just stubble and dirt. I didn't hesitate. I veered off the path and just ran. I ran across that field like the devil himself was on my heels. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my legs churning, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I don't remember the run across the field. I just remember the sensation of terror and the burning in my lungs. I remember seeing the lights of my friend's house in the distance and feeling a sob choke out of me. I didn't stop running until I stumbled onto his porch, my hands slapping against the wooden door, my body heaving. He opened the door, his face a mask of shock. I must have been a sight. Pale, shaking, covered in sweat and dirt, unable to form a coherent sentence. I just pushed past him into the light and the warmth of his living room and collapsed into a chair. I never went back for my gear. I never camped alone again. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since that October in 1987. A bear? No. A person? Absolutely not. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The size, the strength, the intelligence, that scream. It all adds up to one thing, the thing you're not supposed to believe in. And I'll tell you, believing in it is a hell of a lot easier when it's standing 10 feet away from you, looking you dead in the eye and screaming like the end of the world. I still hear that sound sometimes, right before I fall asleep. I still see that shape on the tracks, and I still don't have any answers. I just have the memory and the fear. It never really goes away. Story 19. It happened when I was 13, on a family camping trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. It was the summer, late July, I think. The air was dry and thin, and the sun felt hotter during the day because we were up so high. We'd been camping there for 3 days already. My dad loved it. The solitude, the quiet, the whole getting back to nature thing. My mum tolerated it for his sake. My older sister, she was 16 and hated every second of it. Always glued to her Discman, trying to find a sliver of cell service that didn't exist. I was the excited one. I loved it. I loved the smell of pine needles and campfire smoke. I loved the way the stars looked at night. So many of them, like someone had thrown a bucket of glitter across black velvet. And I was especially excited because, for the whole week before we left, there had been reports in the local paper about bear sightings in that exact area. Not just any bears, but a black bear with 2 cubs that had been getting a little too brave around campgrounds. I was obsessed. I wanted to see one more than anything. Not up close, obviously, but from a safe distance. I wanted that story to tell my friends when school started again. Because of that, I had begged to sleep nearest the tent door. Our tent was a big green 4-person dome thing. My parents slept on one side, my sister and I on the other. The door was a long flap with a zipper that ran from the top to the bottom. My spot was right next to it. I figured if a bear came poking around, I'd be the first to know. My sister thought I was an idiot and was happy to have the spot farther inside. That night, the 4th night of the trip, was like the others. We'd had hot dogs and beans for dinner, sat around the fire until it died down to glowing embers, and then my dad had done the whole bear-safe routine. He'd hung our food bag, a big blue nylon thing with all our coolers and dry goods inside. From a high branch on a tall pine tree about 50 feet from our tent, he used a long rope, threw it over the branch, and hoisted the bag up until it dangled, swinging a little, maybe 15 feet off the ground. It was supposed to be out of reach. I fell asleep pretty quickly. The air was cold, and I was buried deep in my sleeping bag, the kind that smells like nylon and old campfires. I remember the sound of my dad snoring softly, and the absolute total blackness you only get in the deep woods. No city lights, nothing. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The middle of the night. It was still pitch black. I hadn't woken up from a dream or anything. It was a sudden, jarring wake-up, like a switch had been flipped in my brain. My eyes were just open, and I was listening. At first, I didn't hear anything except the usual night sounds. The faint whisper of wind in the tops of the pines, a cricket somewhere. But then I heard it, a sound that wasn't right. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like a gentle thump, thump, followed by a faint, scraping rustle. It was coming from the direction of the food bag. My heart immediately started beating faster. This was it. The bear. I was sure of it. I felt a thrill, a mix of pure excitement and a low thrum of fear. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped for a second, then started again. A soft thump. I had to see. I had to. Moving was terrifying. I was in a mummy sleeping bag, so I had to sort of wiggle my arms out. The fabric of the bag was loud, a crinkly, swishing sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I froze every few seconds, listening to see if my parents had woken up. My dad's snoring continued, a steady, reassuring rhythm. My sister was a silent lump on the other side of the tent. Slowly, so slowly it felt like it took an hour, I turned onto my side, facing the tent door. The zipper looked huge in the dark. It was one of those big, plastic-toothed zippers with a heavy pull. My hand was shaking as I reached for it. I was afraid the zipper would be loud, a classic horror movie mistake. But I figured if it was a bear, a little zipper noise wouldn't spook it. They're loud animals, right? I pinched the zipper pull between my thumb and forefinger. It was cold. I took a deep, silent breath and pulled. The zipper made a sound, but it wasn't a loud, ripping noise. It was a low, steady zip that seemed to crawl through the silence. I only opened it a foot, maybe a little less, just enough to peek out. I put my face to the opening, the cold night air hitting my skin. I had to blink a few times for my eyes to adjust. There was a bit of moonlight filtering through the trees, not much, but enough to see shapes and outlines. I looked toward the tree where the food bag was hanging, and I saw them. It wasn't a bear. There were two of them, two tall, dark figures standing upright under the tree. They were just standing there. My brain short-circuited. It couldn't process what I was seeing. For a second, I thought it was two people, maybe other campers, trying to steal our food, but that didn't make sense. They were too tall, way too tall. I used my dad as a reference point without even thinking about it. My dad is 5'10". He'd stood under that same tree to throw the rope. The bigger one of these two, its chest was level with where the top of my dad's head would be. I'm not good at math, but even at 13, I knew that meant it was huge. 7.5 feet tall? 8? I don't know. It was massive. The other one was shorter, but still a full head taller than my dad. They were covered in hair. Dark hair, like really dark brown or black. It wasn't shaggy like a grizzly bear's. It looked sleeker, like thick, matted fur. Their arms were incredibly long, hanging down past their knees. I remember specifically noticing their hips. They were narrow, like a man's hips, not wide and bulky like a bear's body. Their legs were thick and powerful looking. They weren't moving much. The bigger one was just looking up at the food bag, which was still swinging gently. The smaller one was standing a few feet away, its head tilted. They were completely silent. That was the thing that got me first. The silence. There was no grunting, no sniffing, no sound of breathing, just that immense, heavy silence around them. I was frozen. My body went cold, then hot. This wasn't excitement anymore. This was a deep, primal terror, a kind of fear I didn't know existed. It was the fear of seeing something that shouldn't be. My mouth was dry. I couldn't swallow. I must have been staring for maybe 10 seconds, my brain screaming at me that this was wrong, all wrong, when the bigger one moved. It reached up toward the food bag. Its arm uncoiled, and it was so long. Its hand, I couldn't see fingers clearly, but it was big and dark, and it just brushed the bottom of the bag, making it swing a little more. It wasn't trying to grab it, just touching it, and that's when I messed up. I gasped. It wasn't a loud gasp. It was a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, a tiny, strangled sound, as the reality of what I was seeing finally crashed down on me. Both of their heads snapped toward me. It was so fast. 1 second they were looking at the bag. The next, their heads were turned and they were looking right at me. I couldn't see their eyes, not details, just dark patches in darker faces, but I felt their gaze. It was a physical weight, pressing against me through the thin nylon of the tent. I felt seen, completely and utterly exposed. My heart just stopped. I swear it stopped beating. I stopped breathing. Every cell in my body was screaming. They didn't make a sound. They didn't growl, they didn't startle. They just looked at me, and then they looked at each other. It was a quick turn of their heads, a silent communication that lasted less than a second. A knowing glance, then they were gone. They didn't run, they didn't fade, they vanished. One moment they were there, two solid, massive shapes in the moonlight, and the next, the space under the tree was empty. The food bag was still swinging in a slow, lazy circle. I stayed there, my face pressed to the slit in the tent for what felt like forever. I was trembling so hard, my teeth were chattering. I was crying, but without making any sound, just hot tears running down my cold face and into the corner of my mouth. I didn't move. I was terrified that if I moved, if I made a single sound, they would come back, or that they were still out there, just beyond the trees, watching. I must have stayed like that for an hour, maybe 2. The sky started to lighten from black to a deep, dark blue. The stars began to fade. As soon as there was enough grey light to see, I slowly, carefully zipped the tent flap shut. The sound of the zipper felt like a scream in the quiet morning. I didn't sleep. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, curled into a ball, staring at the green fabric of the tent wall, waiting for the sun to fully rise. When my dad finally stirred and sat up, asking who wanted pancakes, it was the most normal, beautiful sound I had ever heard. The second everyone was awake and moving, I scrambled out of the tent. I went straight to the tree. The ground underneath was hard-packed earth, dry and covered in a scattering of brown pine needles. I got on my hands and knees. I searched every inch of that ground. I looked for footprints, for broken twigs, for anything. There was nothing, not a single track, not a single sign that anything heavier than a squirrel had been there. The food bag hung untouched, exactly as my dad had left it. I stood up, my knees dirty, feeling a confusion so deep it was like a physical sickness. Had I dreamed it? A hallucination? But it had felt more real than anything. I could still feel the cold air on my face, see the way the moonlight gleamed dully on their dark hair, the way their heads turned in unison. I didn't say a word. Not that day, not for the rest of the trip. We broke camp and drove home, and I sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window at the passing trees. My sister complained about the lack of showers. My mom talked about the laundry. My dad whistled along to the radio. It was all so normal, and I felt like I was living in a different world, a world where I knew a secret that was too big and too terrifying to share. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. I was afraid they'd tease me, call it a nightmare, so I buried it. I pushed it down deep and tried to forget about it. It wasn't until years later, when I was in college, that I saw it. A friend was doing a project on cryptozoology for an anthropology class, and he had a clip from the Patterson-Gimlin film on his laptop. I was sitting next to him, just glancing at the screen, and when that figure walked across the screen, my blood ran cold. The build, the long arms, the narrow hips, the way it moved. It was her, the smaller one I saw. It was exactly the same. That's when I knew I hadn't dreamed it. I hadn't imagined it. I saw something that day, something real, something powerful and unknown that lives in the deep, quiet places of this world, and sometimes on a quiet night when the wind sounds just right. I remember the silence and the way they looked at each other, and I feel that same 13-year-old's fear all over again. I still don't know what they were. I just know what I saw.